Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is 2 p.m. I'd like to try and start on time. Thank you very much and welcome to the April meeting of the Constitution and Governance Committee. Hope everybody can hear me. My name's Ross Henley. I'm the chair of the Constitution and Governance Committee. I'd like to welcome everybody into the room who's in the room and also equally people online. Welcome any members of the public. Particularly like to welcome Kai, who's sat at the back there, who lives in my division and is studying for her Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. And as part of that, she's shadowing me at some of my councillor roles as a local Somerset councillor as part of a community thing for her Duke of Edinburgh's award scheme. So you're very brave, Kai, sitting through Constitution and Governance Committee. So I hope you get a gold star when you get your award at the end of it. Thank you. You're most welcome. Now, today's meeting will be run using the webcasting system via Microsoft Teams. We've tested it. Everything seems to be working okay, which is gratifying after the teething trouble we had when we had the working party a couple of weeks ago. Committee members and key officers are physically present in the council chamber, which we are meeting obviously in Dean House in Taunton today. Other elected members and members of the public and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting to speak on a specific agenda items or observe it, and that's going to happen. And this meeting, as I said, is being webcast, and therefore other members of the public and partners can observe the meeting remotely. The agenda pack has been made available via mod.gov or directly from the council website from the link which was sent out to members. And when you're invited to speak, please could you speak clearly into the microphone? And it's really important, particularly if you're online, to state who you are for the benefit of everybody who's listening, not just members and officers, but to the members of the public who might be watching us as well and interested in listening to the meeting so they can identify who is speaking. And I do need to, I'm sure you're aware of this, but I do need to advise you, remind you that the meeting is being audio recorded. And finally, as agendas are now viewed electronically, could I kindly request that members and officers refer to page numbers from the published agenda pack to assist all present in finding the appropriate information. So move formally on then to apologies for absence. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Helen Kay, who's being substituted today by Councillor Dave Mansell. And we've had apologies from Councillor Christine Lawrence, who's attending online, but her substitute in the room is Councillor Sue Osborne.
Did have apologies from Councillor Richard Wilkins, but he is in the room. So I don't know if you're apologising for attending now, Richard, but you're most welcome anyway, as always. Item number 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting of the Constitution and Governance Committee, which took place on the 31st of January. And I was very, very pleased. Thank you very much, Mike. Vice Chair, Tim Curley chaired that meeting. I was away running a mental health course in Belfast that day, face to face. So thank you very much, Tim, for picking that meeting up. And can we confirm the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting which took place on the 31st of January? Do I have a proposer? It's Councillor Lovell. And a seconder? So, okay, Councillor Chilcott, thank you very much. All those in favour? That is carried. Thank you. Item number 3 is declarations of interest. Members will be invited to disclose any interest regarding any matters on the agenda and specify the nature of that particular interest. And we'll highlight to the meeting the standard declarations of panel members in relation to their membership of town and parish councils, which of course are duly published on the council website for members of the public or any other interested parties to peruse and check at their leisure. Item number 4, moving swiftly on, is public question time. And we have been given notice of 3 submissions of questions from 3 different individuals, and we'll be giving verbal answers, but we also have them available so they'll be circulated in writing as well. Claire, Nigel Bean is the first questioner. I know he can't be with us today and has apologised, but you're going to read out Nigel's question, aren't you?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a submission on behalf of Nigel Bean. I'm asking questions about the review of Council Constitution Part B, public participation, to consider review of Part B of the Constitution, which is item number 5. Question A, it is stated in paragraph 1.3 that through the work of the review, the working group made it clear that the Council welcomes public participation at all of its committee meetings and has proposed some amendments which will hopefully reflect this. Does this committee believe that in paragraph 3.5/6, public participation will be improved by keeping the same gap between the meeting and deadline for questions at 3 clear working days rather than, say, adopting 2 clear working days as per Cornwall Council? Question B is, often council papers and appendices are published a week before the meeting, leaving little time for members of the public to consider, prepare, offer alternatives or raise concerns. Also, the council's specialist professional officers draft, author papers, making recommendations in a particular style manner whilst attempting to adopt a plain, easy to read layout presentation that refers to appendices and other background papers. Is this asymmetry reasonable in the circumstances? Question C is paragraph 3.7 states the main proposed amendment was to move from a maximum of 3 questions per speaker to a maximum of 2 questions. It was felt that with the increase in time allocation and a slight decrease in number of questions would facilitate a higher number of speakers the opportunity to address each meeting. Our emphasis. So surely it is reasonable to keep the number of questions at 3 per speaker, as often difficult interrelated topics, issues, matters arise. So to have a significant 33.33% reduction in the number of questions someone can ask appears unwarranted, unnecessary, and contradicts the thrust or intention of paragraph 1.3 quoted above. So why not raise it to 4 questions per speaker? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Question for Nigel, Mr. Nigel Bean. Anyway, thank you, Nigel, for your feedback and questions regarding the proposed revisions to the Council's public participation provisions within the Constitution. The Council encourages and actively supports people getting involved in all of its committee meetings across Somerset. I'd like to highlight that unlike Somerset Council, not all councils have a specific section of their constitution devoted to public participation or have a public question time item on the committee meeting agendas. And in respect of these questions, I would offer the following responses. A, for some time, the Council has operated a requirement that any public statements or questions need to be submitted 3 clear working days ahead of a committee meeting. This deadline was purposefully even designed with the aim that a response is provided at committee meetings. Experience has shown that some submissions contain complex questions which can require a lot of work and coordination across several services in order to prepare a response in time for a committee meeting. In addition, the preparation of a committee report is generally at the end of any service consultation or engagement with local communities, so that there already have been other opportunities for questions and interaction ahead of a committee meeting with officers or elected members. Our research shows and confirms that other councils do have different deadline dates, but ultimately this is of course a matter of local choice. B, we do provide training and guidance for officers to help them draft reports and prepare supporting information for meetings with an emphasis on plain English. We stress to report authors the importance of drafting reports so that any member of the public reading it is clear on the purpose of the report, the options which are considered, any feedback from consultation, and what the implications are and what the recommendations are for the decision maker. And we will look at further at the points raised to see what more can be done by officers to improve clarity and the quality of reports to committees. And C, our comparison with peer and neighbouring councils has identified a wide range of arrangements in the maximum number of questions from public speakers. The table in paragraph 3.5 of the covering report identifies that the average number of questions is 2 questions per speaker, and this has informed the recommendations. A positive consequence from this proposed change is intended to be that more speakers can be heard, covering a wide range of topics during the time allocated for public question time at our committee meetings. And finally, can I give reassurance to committee that all the proposals within the report have been subject to review against peer and neighbouring councils' arrangements. The proposals being recommended will continue to ensure that our committee meetings are open, transparent, and positively support public participation and underpin the council's commitment to democratic accountability at its meetings. We have that in writing, obviously, because it was very long, that answer, but we have it in writing. That will be circulated in the usual fashion. Next question that we have is, we've got 2 further questions and they're both online, I've checked. The very first one is Councillor Michael Gay, who I think is a parish councillor, one of our parishes. Michael, you're most welcome to Constitution and Governance. Thank you. And can we hear your question, please?
Thank you, Chair. I am Michael Gay, previously a district councillor and currently chair of Monstro Parish Council. So my thanks to you, Chair, for taking the question, and good afternoon to councillors. I asked my question against the context of many people, especially younger people, turning away from involvement in democratic systems, partly because they feel they have no part in decisions made about them. I've noted with great concern the proposal that waste and mineral applications would be determined by direct reference to the Strategic Planning Committee under a change to the Constitution. There appears to be no paper setting out advantages and disadvantages of this proposal, and no consultation with the electorate or other bodies affected, so I must provide some detail. Whereas the strategic and national aspects of judging applications are understood as part of the balance, the direct impact of such decisions is usually local. For example, consideration of the rights and obligations under paragraph 217B and C of the NPPF. The relevant division councillors are best placed to understand such impacts, to receive and judge input from those directly affected, and this is how the electorate remain in touch with local government, how they feel able to play their part in decisions that affect them personally. The area planning boards, which are more readily accessible for local residents and businesses, are deemed sufficient to judge equally complex applications and should be supported by sufficient technical information by the officers. There could be a presumption, if you like, for onward referral if full consensus can't be achieved, with related strategic meetings could be held at the relevant area board offices. So I ask you, does the committee accept that removing debate and decision from local area boards to a distant meeting in Taunton will have a quelling effect on local involvement and representation in the decision-making process for these very important applications? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your notice of your question. Thank you for your question. I hope you don't mind. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Richard, is it Richard Moorher? I really apologise if I've got that name wrong. His question, I think, is of a similar nature, and I'm going to give a joint answer to both of those questions once Richard has posed his question. Is that okay? Richard Moorher, again, I apologise if I've got your name wrong. I'd like to ask you a question.
No, that's fine. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Jolly good. Okay, it's actually, my name is Richard Moore, so pretty well correct in pronunciation. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'd like to briefly comment on item 10, the same item in effect as Michael's just commented on, which seeks to amend the terms of reference for various planning committees. I live in Clowford in the parish of Wanstead in East Somerset, and over the last 3 years, I've led the objection campaign to the biggest current minerals application in Somerset by Heidelberg Materials to reopen West Down Quarry. This was to have been determined at the SC Planning Committee East. I still hope it will be, ensuring local democratic scrutiny and participation. However, and I'm going to repeat a bit of Michael's points here, I'm afraid, I didn't realise but at point 3.1 on page 3 of supplement 2 at the top of the agenda page on the website, the proposal to remove the excellent change from centralised to local determination brought in by the new Lib Dem-led Unitary Council only last year, and instead the proposal will dictate that all waste and mineral planning applications are to be referred to the county-wide Strategic Planning Committee for determination. In addition, in point 3 on page 3, there's a new proposal that the Strategic Planning Committee should have oversight of the implementation of measures to deliver mandatory biodiversity net gain in accordance with the Environment Act of 2021. On this last point, I know how important it is, as Heidelberg has consistently refused to use the latest Natural England metric. This is obviously a very technical area of law. These are fundamental proposed changes to the democratic process. So my question to this committee is a simple one. As the majority of quarrying in Somerset occurs in East Somerset, why would you amend the constitution to reverse the Feb 23 change, which allowed members who understand the local issues and represent the local people who will be affected by these schemes to determine all mineral planning applications at a strategic county level? Reverting to the old Somerset Council policy of centralising minerals applications so that they are determined by the Strategic Planning Committee will deprive local residents of local representation on the major schemes which matter to them most. In addition, why centralise oversight of implementation of BNG when the best placed body to do this task is the Area Planning Committee, who can look at the legal issues on a site-specific basis? Why refer these local schemes to strategic, who won't have the local knowledge, and in the case of Somerset East, are over 50 miles away in Taunton? In both cases, the centralising of local decision-making is an oxymoron, with no justification that I've seen. This is local government, let's keep it local. For good reasons of maintaining confidence in the democratic process, I would ask you to reject these two proposed constitutional changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both to Richard and to Michael, for those questions. I'm going to give a joint answer, which I'm going to read out, and obviously we made available in writing afterwards. The Strategic Committee is a planning committee made up of local members who are largely part of the wider planning team for the consideration of planning applications submitted to this council. The reshaping of the committee tasks as part of this proposed change have been the subject of much debate and discussion of a working party to review the performance of the various planning committees, and it's an internal move for the consideration of waste and mineral applications only. The proposal has been informed by a survey of all Somerset Council elected members and has been the subject of consideration at a workshop for members, which took place 2 weeks ago, to discuss proposed changes to the Constitution for planning and licensing. Local councillors can attend any of the planning committees to present their views, and the Strategic Planning Committee is no different, and members can either attend in person or online remotely. It is the intention of the Strategic Committee to meet in the area most convenient to the matters that are being discussed, so that members of the public are more easily able to attend should they wish. This is instead of assuming that all meetings will be held in Taunton. That is a consideration of accessibility for all and the carbon footprint of the council, reducing road miles where possible. And it's intended that the movement of function will make the decision-making process easier to follow, rather have a potential two-stage process for waste and mineral applications. And we want to be more transparent for all parties involved. And further, the area-based planning committees consider and determine applications generally in accordance with the local development plans of the former district councils, where waste and mineral applications and that those are proposed to be moved to the Strategic Committee are determined with reference to the Somerset-wide waste and mineral plans, as well as the local plans for the specific area. And finally, from a training perspective, that means we mainly need to train the 13 members of the Strategic Planning Committee, plus of course any substitutes that may sit on waste and mineral matters, rather than all 65 members as we do at present. This means we can better focus on our training and resources on developing and supporting those specific 13 members who will sit on the waste and mineral policy and development management issues. And again, all the written answers to these questions will be made available in the usual manner. Thank you. This afternoon. Wanted to put a bit of context before we move on to item number 5 and do a bit of introduction about the work that's been going on off stage by the various different working parties, the chairs and vice chairs of the planning committee, likewise the licensing committee. There's an awful lot of work that's been going on drawing these committee papers together and these reports, workshops, meetings, and this is part of a wider process. And I'm just going to do a little bit of outline of where we are and where this meeting fits in with the process overall. And the development of the council's new constitution for our new unitary council in early 2023 was followed by extensive partnership work by the 5 legacy councils and was influenced by the experience of constitution and previous local government reorganisations which took place in Buckinghamshire, Wiltshire and Dorset. Reference was also made to best practice from our 5 legacy councils. That was the old county councils and the 4 districts in Somerset. And this council committed to review the constitution its first year and asked this committee to lead and oversee that review and then make recommendations back to full council at the annual general meeting, which will take place next month in May. Areas of the constitution that we agreed for specific focus included public question times procedures at committee meetings, full council meeting procedure rules, planning committees terms of references, licensing and regulatory committee terms of reference, the scheme of delegation and decision-making procedures, contract procedure rules and financial regulations. Now, we set up 3 member-led working groups which were established with support from officers. The planning committee terms of reference, that was led by the planning committee chairs and vice chairs and lead member for economic development planning and assets. Licensing and regulatory terms of reference led by the committee chair, the vice chair and the lead member for communities, housing and culture. And council procedures and public participation are led by myself and Tim Curley and the leader of the council. Now, thank you to those working groups for their work over the several months. They've presented their review and the recommendations and report have been considered by today by committee. And I know a number of you were at the working party which took place in this room Thursday before last, I think it was, where we certainly looked at a number of these issues. We're looking on the committee today. That was a big part of the process. The working parties followed by the workshop, then this committee, and any comments we have or recommendations will be taken forward then as part of this overall process, or final decisions are made by the full annual council on the 22nd of May. And subject to the committee's views and debate today, just to reinforce that, committee then will decide what recommendations we make on the review of the constitution to make to the council's annual general meeting. And I'll highlight that any further review of the constitution and scheme of delegation will be required in 24-25 as a consequence of any changes to the council's target operating model and its organisational structures as part of the council's improvement and transformation programme. I just really wanted to put things a little bit in context about where this meeting fits with the whole overall process, for the great amount of work and excellent work that's been going on off stage from officers and councillors together to bring these reports forward to us today. Thank you. The first of these reports we're going to look at is item number 5, and I draw your attention in your main agenda to pages 13 to 66, and that's review of the council's constitution. And I'd like to invite Scott Waldridge, who's the interim head of governance and democratic services, to introduce reports which are included in the agenda pack.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I know we've discussed a number of these certainly at the workshop, but particularly in terms of the work of the working group, as Councillor Henley's just outlined. It's probably key for me just to draw your attention to pages 14 and 15 of the agenda pack, starting with paragraph 3.5. And again, you can see there the comparative work that's been done with a number of neighbouring councils who we consider to be peer councils in terms of public participation rules. But you can also then see through to 3.6 and 3.7 specific areas which are then summarising proposed changes to what is part B of the council's constitution, which relates to public participation at its committee meetings. You'll see particularly in terms of 3.6, which is summarising there some of the proposed amendments in that table. You can see a comparison compared to our sort of internal procedure. I'll probably highlight one of the main proposed changes relates to a proposal to reduce the number of questions to be considered at a meeting. That doesn't mean the number of questions that someone can put in, because currently people can put in as many questions as they like. It's just that we limit only 3 questions at the meeting, and the remaining questions are dealt with via correspondence outside of the meeting. So again, just to emphasise that point, but on this, we're proposing, looking at some experience of others, that generally the average tends to be 2 questions per speaker. And again, we're proposing that as one of the proposed amendments to our current arrangements. One of the advantages of that is clearly around, it should then provide the opportunity for us to have more speakers at a meeting through the sheer number of questions that can be asked during the public question time arrangement. The other point I would flag, public question time under Part B is currently set at 20 minutes. And again, the proposals seek to increase that to 30 minutes, in line again with some of our other speakers. So overall, I would hope that the committee would welcome the proposals, certainly in terms of seeking to enable more speakers at our meetings, and again just recognise the importance of public participation, not just being at committee meetings, but clearly the work that we do outside of those meetings in terms of advanced consultation and engagement with communities.
Thank you very much, Scott. I'm going to open this up for members. Obviously, we've got a number of members of the committee in the room, and we also have some members of the committee who are joining us online and other interested members as well. If you are joining us online, please don't forget to indicate you wish to speak by raising of the hand, and myself as chair and Claire will monitor that and make sure that you will be called in a timely fashion. We won't forget you, I promise. Who would like to start? Scott.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be others. I've actually got 5 questions. Do you want me to rattle through them or do a couple at a time? So the first one is related to page 15, 3.6. I feel that the maximum number of 8 speakers may not be enough for the annual council meeting. This tends to be the busiest of the year and attracts much public interest. So that's my first point. The second one relates to page 20. There are lots of references right throughout the whole of the Constitution where you talk about other things that you are linking to, for example, local councillors' details. I'm just wondering whether moving forward we ought to have hyperlinks included within it, so if any residents read it, they've got the link there to know where to go, because I know sometimes searching for things on our council pages can be a bit of a challenge from experience. My next question relates to confidential information. There's clear guidance as to when information is confidential and when not, and I just wondered whether reference should be made to Schedule 12 of the Local Government Act 1972. That's talked about on page 25. In other areas of the report, we have referenced, where we've got our guidance from, and I felt it might be helpful there. Next question is to do with discretion to exclude the public. There are, to my understanding now, guidelines that we have here that we've sort of laid out, and I just wonder whether they should be referred to or outlined in the Constitution. Page 30, and I have got this all typed out if you need to go back to it, Chair. Petitions on local issues will normally be presented to and dealt with by the LCN. And then a report by officer to be considered by the LCN. My concern with that was there is quite a gap between LCN meetings, and if it was a burning issue, that delay actually might be too long between LCN meetings. And finally, on page 36, in 1.12, it says that there'll normally be a brief verbal response responding to questions. As we're time limiting the questioners, should we put a time limit on those responding? Thank you.
Very much, Mandy. Scott, do you want to try and pick some of those questions up?
So I think, again, I suppose starting with the first point, particularly in terms of maximum number of speakers, I think what I'd certainly try and highlight, and it's in, if you look on page, what would be page 35, paragraph 1.8, again, hopefully members will recognise there's a line in there at the final part of that paragraph which says the chair of the relevant meeting has discretion to vary the time and the number of speakers allowed for public speaking. So that's something that's, again, seen as important to give that flexibility for all meetings, not just full council, but effectively it's just there to allow for those scenarios where you do have a lot of public interest, rather than what these are, which are trying to set out a sort of general approach rather than bespoke arrangements for all the individual committees. So hopefully that's a reassurance around that's there to provide for that variety to take place. Certainly in terms of the references to confidential exempt information, again, they are applied as and when any exempt information is brought before any committees. And again, that's normally dealt with in accordance with legislation. And in most cases, I think as members are aware, legislation trumps the Constitution in principle terms. So where we deal with any of those, rather than us repeat it in the Constitution. I think the point, again, in terms of the petition point, just double checking. I don't think we've made any recommended changes in terms of the current petition arrangements.
It's referenced on page 30 and page 49. It's in two places. I am just questioning that from a practicalities point of view.
I mean, the reference to, I think, both page 30 is effectively the council's existing arrangements.
It is, but I thought now would be the time to ask the question.
I mean, those are just the council's existing arrangements, as in, should a petition be presented, then it can be dealt with through a local community network. Generally, the experience of the first year, though, certainly from my knowledge, is that most petitioners don't take them generally to their local community networks. Instead, they'll be taking them through our main committees, whether it's full council or executive. I think for me, it's something for us to look at in terms of how we can better communicate the work of the local community networks and promote them also as areas that people can bring forward. So I suppose for me, it's an action for us to work with colleagues on our local community networks to promote that opportunity.
I had a couple I
Thanks.
didn't have
Would you
responses to, so yeah, I had a couple that weren't responded to. Brief responses to questions was my other suggestion. I think it's been raised by a number of councillors. If we are restricting those asking the question, should we restrict those in some way that are responding? And the other one was around using hyperlinks in future when we are connecting to other papers.
I mean, certainly the proposal around hyperlinks, again, we can take that away and look at. That's something we've used before, so it's dealt with. You know, it's well within our gift in terms of technology. On the brief responses, again, I think that's work in progress in terms of particularly at some of our principal meetings like full council. And I know we're certainly making improvements on that in terms of moving towards succinct summaries with the detail provided in the actual detailed responses themselves.
Dave Mansell.
Thank you. I'd like to refer to page 15 and the questions to committees. So I was interested in the response given about the deadline for the questions, and do understand and accept that it's good to have responses to them, and there needs to be some preparation time in advance of the meetings. I also note, though, that often committee papers and in general, they're only published a week before the meeting. So you've really got to be on the ball to get your questions in. And I think we do need to look at it at the other side of, you know, the other end of this, from the member of the public who's got something to question, something to say, and we're only giving them a couple of days, and they're not the professionals who are paid full time to work on this and who know it's coming. So I do feel a bit concerned at that. I'm quite happy with some sort of target, how it's expressed, or even a deadline saying it 3 days. But I would like there to be something that indicates questions can still come in after that, and they could be useful. I mean, often people, as we've seen today, are raising something that the committee should want to hear, because it adds to the debate and may add a perspective that hadn't occurred to them. So to artificially cut it off doesn't feel right. So I hope there can be some leeway, at least indicated in that, and if there is time to take people's statements or questions after that 3-day deadline, they should still be taken, unless there's a reason why they can't be. So that's one. And second, thinking about the number of questions that speakers have. If I've understood it correctly, other councils, it's been that have an average of 2. How it works in practice at other councils, obviously, perhaps we know less of. It strikes me, though, that many times the speakers don't actually necessarily need the full 3. They're quite happy with 1 or 2, but we're artificially going to put them down to 2 when they might have 3 good questions. And again, we're stopping them there, and there might only be 1 person asking a question, which gets dealt with in part of the time. It's not going up to the 8. We've not had 8 today, we've had 3. So if they'd all had 3, we probably still wouldn't have taken all the time up. So it feels like we're creating a barrier to people, but not actually, when you look at it, for that good of reasons. And it has said that the chair's got some discretion in this. My feeling is it should be 3 questions and variation away from that if there's large numbers of speakers, which is not that common in my experience. So I hope I'd be interested in responses, and particularly like to see the question limit going up to 3.
Dave, Scott, would you like to respond to Councillor Mansell's questions?
Something, and hopefully with reassurance. Again, if you look at page 35, which are the proposed amendments, hopefully paragraph 1.7, again, you'll see reference there, not least to which in terms of further flexibility for the chair in terms of receiving and admitting late questions, late submissions after the deadline. Indeed, hopefully you'll note that today, 2 of the public speakers today actually submitted their questions after the 3-day deadline. And again, the discretion being exercised by the chair. Again, that's reflected in paragraph 1.7. And certainly my experience with pretty much all of the meetings that I'm aware of, that discretion is used pretty much a lot in reality. I think the balance, and it's always a tricky balance, the balance is always towards ensuring that at least we're trying to set out in these arrangements what the expectation is, mainly in terms of being able to deal with scenarios where we have large numbers of speakers with multiple questions. And again, it's about also striking that balance, and it's a difficult balance sometimes, between also the fact that the business for the meeting, which is also scheduled on the agenda, also needs to be transacted within that given period. So it's always found it can be a tricky balance in terms of that 30-minute allocation, number of speakers, and just using that mathematical sort of approach. But hopefully the committee and members will be reassured that those provisions around discretion, which exist in 1.7 and 1.8, are examples where, again, experience has been shown that we use those and we use them well.
You wanted to come back with supplementary, did you?
Yes, if I may, and I think there's still one question to go, but or perhaps hasn't been directly addressed yet. That's good on the working days, especially if I hope that's clear on the website. It's so the information to the public, and I'm getting a nod, so I'm reassured on that. So I'm not sure we had a direct response on the, or perhaps I wasn't listening attentively enough on the 3 questions per speaker.
I mean, on the 3 questions per speaker, I mean, that's the current arrangement that the council operates. The proposals that are set out in this paper through the working group are that they're recommended to be reduced down to 2. Again, I would highlight there is discretion for the chair. You know, should there be a scenario where there's actually only 1 speaker and that 1 speaker has, say, 3 or 4 questions of a particular local matter or particular importance, the chair can exercise that discretion to allow that. But I mean, the proposals are just merely seeking to provide a sort of a set bar, almost like a threshold. It doesn't mean that they are a tablet in stone, that, you know, that's the only number of questions, that's the absolute in terms of deadline. It's just trying to set out a clear expectation for everyone. I think the other thing, and I talked about it in part in terms of the introduction. I think for me, it's also just recognising that the committee meeting part of the decision-making process and the report element are very much at the end of the process. There are lots of other opportunities before then for people to engage with their local councillors, with officers, to raise questions, to make and forward any sort of concerns or issues that they would like to be considered in the papers. So I think there is that balance as well, recognising that the report and the meeting is generally not the only time that people have had in order to contact the council and put forward their views.
Want to come back?
If I may, thank you for that. I tend to feel in most cases, people are looking at the papers a week before the meeting, and that's when they know something might be discussed. So I'm not really quite sure whether there are that many other opportunities in most cases. The reality is it's papers published a week ahead of the meeting, and you see what's there. Personally, I don't feel I've heard a good reason why we're going down to 2. Personally, and I would propose it. I don't know if anyone else agrees. I think it should be 3. I see no reason for changing what we've got at the moment.
Barry Clark, you've been waiting very patiently. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My question is very, very easy. Section 4, Citizens' Responsibilities and Obligations, which is on page 49. And I think the same problem also occurs on page 65. 4.1, 4.2 and 4.3 say what citizens must not do. But when it gets to 4.4, it says citizens must disclose any confidential information obtained during the course of the contract with council. I think that's only a typo, unless I just don't understand what the intention is behind it. Thank you.
Do you want to respond?
And those are existing provisions. We're not proposing any changes to those as part of the work of the working group. I mean, that's what the current provision states.
Mr. Wilkins.
Yeah, it's just an observation on the 2/3 question issue. I get 3 questions quite often, but in reality it's 17 questions. So I kind of I see the point of 2 questions. It just makes it easier. There are other ways if you really are, you really want to get more questions on, you get other people to help you, perhaps. I don't know. It's don't see the problem with that.
Bear in mind also then thanks for that intervention, Richard, that the comments are made and the ideas are going to be recorded in the minutes and will be recorded in the report, which goes to full annual council as well for the decision-making process. So any point which is made here will be encompassed within the report and noted and looked at before councillors have the opportunity to vote before council. Stephen Pugsley.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just recall one of the points that we made in the workshop a few weeks ago, which is that actually some of the questions, particularly at full council, notably at full council, aren't always absolutely relevant to the agenda of that meeting. It's an opportunity for people to come and to raise perfectly valid and important points in front of the entire council body, but it isn't necessarily directly related to the agenda that members have to discuss. And I think we reached the conclusion that there is scope for us to think laterally about having some other sort of stakeholder forum where members of the public could actually attend with proper attendance from members and officers, so that a number of issues can get raised there rather than them feeling perhaps shunted into having to raise them at the full council. And I would hope that, although it won't necessarily be part of the formal papers that we're looking at now, that can be part of the consideration of this group, amongst others, over the next few months, because I think there is definitely a role for a meeting of that sort in order to be able to deal with a number of questions which otherwise, as I say, just get shunted into the full council. The other point I was going to raise, picking up Councillor Chilcott's point on petitions and LCNs, of course, as the LCNs grow in stature and maturity, we hope that they will develop more of the receptive nature that means that people will feel that they will want to attend those meetings. At the moment, our LCN on Exmoor probably meets more often than the full council does. And I think that is going to be part of the response if this is going to work. The LCNs do need to meet regularly enough, as Councillor Chilcott says, to be able to deal with questions of that sort. But this, I suspect, is part of the evolution of those particular bodies. But Councillor Chilcott makes a perfectly valid point. I think the answer to it is to make sure that the LCNs meet regularly so that they are in a position to receive those petitions.
Thank you, Stephen. Scott.
I mean, again, these are all really good points, particularly for the council in terms of how it looks at promoting all of the various opportunities. I think Councillor Clugsy makes a really good point about sometimes full council is seen as almost that pinnacle opportunity for people to go to, where actually there are many opportunities for communities to attend a whole range of various committees, to raise questions, to make suggestions, but even also in terms of, as Councillor Clugsy refers to, the growing maturity of LCNs, that best places them also as those local opportunities for people to attend and also put forward views. I think the only other bit, and apologies just to Councillor Clark in terms of his reference to page 49 and 4.4. Whilst I was saying that is the current part of the Constitution, he is right in flagging there is a typo because we don't want citizens to disclose confidential information. We actually must not. So there is a point in there for us to pick up in our amendments, just to give that assurance.
Chair, it crops up on page 65 as well, the same thing.
Thank you very much. Just online first, Tim Curley's been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chair. Hope everyone can hear me properly. On the question of 2 or 3 questions, I just wanted to quickly speak in favour of the change to 2. Whereas there is plenty of opportunity for people to ask questions of the council, we have had some meetings recently of full council which have gone to quite an extraordinary length. And I think that our job really is to make proper decisions. And I would even postulate that perhaps some of our decision-making process has been impacted by the fact that we are in the room for so long. So I think it might be a good idea to try and control those very, very lengthy public question times to enable us to make proper decisions. Thank you, Chair.
And that's a point well made, isn't it? I correct me if I'm wrong. I think there was one full council meeting where I think of the 4 hours allocated for the meeting, I think, was it nearly 2 hours was taken up with well, at least an hour and a half was taken up with that 4 hours dealing with the public question time. But yeah. Okay. Councillor Osborne.
I thought I'd drawn one of these sort of duff mics for a minute. My question relates to an item on page 30 and 48, which is talking again about petitions, and you're referring that large petitions will trigger a 15-minute debate, but yet nowhere in there is there an actually sort of description or definition of what would constitute a large petition. And people may have different numbers in mind for that. I always understood it was around 15,000 signatures, but I do think there does need to be some sort of clarity in that, so we don't wind up going down the rabbit hole of is it a big one or a smaller one. And in terms of local issues going to the LCN, how are you going to define local issues? Because, for instance, this is probably an extreme one, you could have said the stroke services at Yeovil Hospital was a local issue. It was Yeovil Hospital. It actually wasn't, as it happened. But how do you make that distinction between what is a local issue and could therefore go through the LCNs and what is an issue that should go far wider and come to this council or one of its scrutiny committees? How do we make that distinction? And also in here, with local issues, they go to the LCN, but what happens then? Because the LCNs don't have sort of executive decision-making powers in the way that, say, the old area committees of South Somerset did.
Again, some really good points, particularly in terms of the petition element. Again, just some reassurance. We've not picked up any proposed changes to the current arrangements, but just dealing with some of the points that are made. Again, on these sides of petitions, I'll probably just draw us all to page 28, 3.3. There's a definition in there around the 5,000 signatures being the trigger point for a large petition that triggers debate at a full council meeting. Particularly in terms, I think, just some of the points about the LCNs as part of the process. I think I'd recognise that certainly at the moment we're still in a very early stage about how that would be used. In the main, most of the petitions that I'm aware of, one, make use of the petition scheme that we publish on the website, and very much they are directed through to either full council or through to the executive in terms of direct action. So I think it's an area, as the LCNs mature, we just need to give some further thought about what role the LCNs could play towards supporting that process rather than hindering, which I think some of the things we just need to be alive to. What I may suggest, and again, this is mainly for the committee clearly to consider, you'll appreciate our focus as part of the review has been primarily on the public participation in committee meetings. There's been some really good points made about the petition scheme, which we've not fully considered clearly as part of the working group's work. It may be that the committee may feel perhaps the petition scheme element of Part B is something that the committee would like to add to the work programme for us to do something more focused on over the coming months, perhaps as almost a sort of a phase 2 piece of work on Part B. But again, that's for the committee perhaps to consider.
Let's come back.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea to add it to the work programme, because also looking at this and saying you can put a petition into full council, to LCN, to scrutiny committees, it almost feels that it's not going to be properly joined up, and you could see similar issues coming in from different angles if we're not careful. So you don't get that slick decision making, and you don't get that. So it would be welcome to have a scheme that is very, very clear to residents as to what is the best route to go.
Mandy, you want to come back?
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, 2 questions really. When can you review it? This is a review of the Constitution, but we've heard today that was the same as previous. You might want to review some of the previous Constitution at some point. So when will that be done? And the other question I just want to bring up, there's a lot of debate around the number of questions, etc. What hasn't really been covered is, are we dealing with it on a first come, first served basis? And secondly, you might have a group that are consulting with a larger number of people, and I will again mention the unions that wanted to speak at our full council. It will take them time to go back and debate with their members, which takes time for them to formulate a question and bring it back to us. So I'm just wondering how we deal with that, or whether they can put a marker in early and say we're going to be having a response. I just would like to understand that a bit more.
So in terms of procedures, we generally operate on a first come, first serve. You'll notice though in the amendments, we do under 1.9 on page 35 also highlight where there is duplication or questions that are very similar. So again, we would use that also as a means of ensuring we get the widest amount of topics at meetings, rather than several speakers speaking about exactly the same point and potentially a few speakers being rejected. So for me, that's that piece of work that's done ahead of the meeting with the chair of the meeting about the final list of speakers. But I will come back to that point around the discretion of the chair. So again, where there is clearly a high level of public interest, as we've been seeing certainly since vesting day, the council's welcomed that. And again, that discretion exists to enable, more than the number of speakers, or even to extend that 30-minute point, bearing in mind the chair's comments about a full council meeting where there was an extensive period of public question time. We do that already. So again, we're not planning to curtail any of that. It's just about being clearer in Part B of the Constitution.
We've had a really good thorough debate on that one, the first big item on agenda. Any other councillors in the room or online want to come back, or can we move to the recommendations which are listed on page 13 of your report, 2.1? The Constitution and Governance Committee consider the review, which we've done, and proposed amendments set out in appendices 2 and 3 for the recommendations going to annual council meeting on the 22nd of May. Do I have a proposer for that? It's Councillor Pugsley, seconded by Emily Pearlstone. All those in favour? It is carried. Thank you, members. So next item on the agenda, which is item number 6, which is a review of the council's constitution and the way the council procedures. And I'd like to point out to page 67 to 152. And Scott again is going to introduce the report in the agenda pack. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And again, hopefully I'll be more succinct this time in terms of drawing your attention to page 68 and paragraph 3.3, because that effectively summarises the areas of proposed changes, many of which are they are effectively quite minor changes. One clarification about the number of full council meetings in any given year, and the fact that there's generally an additional meeting in the year of an election. The fact that, again, there's a new section in 3.10 helping specify about meeting duration and what happens in terms of any extensions. Further, that there's the section in 3.14 about public speaking, which will refer back to the Part B arrangements on public speaking arrangements. And then an amendment again, just to show in terms of an outgoing chair remains in office until such time as a successor is appointed. Again, that's generally around some of the sequencing and when the annual general meetings are held. But other than that, those are the only proposed changes that the working groups identified for the council procedures under Part C.
Scott, any member wish to comment on this report? Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Mandy.
Thank you. Just really to touch on the rights to require motions in writing. I'm just trying to grapple with that, and I've tried to grapple with it several occasions in several meetings, and I just really cite perhaps the executive meeting this week where a motion came forward. It wasn't directly connected to a very long motion which you couldn't see and didn't know about, and also it's that I think there's coverage in here about if the debate raises the need for a motion that there might not be needed in writing. So for me, it was some clarity around that whole when notice is needed, when notice isn't needed, and what if it's put in and others in the room perhaps aren't sort of fully aware of it or haven't had sight of it. So it's just cropped up several times in meetings, so I thought I'd ask the question here.
Scott, do you want to answer?
I mean, again, I'm happy to look at that in terms of some specific examples. I mean, we've been operating, if anything, I suppose, compared to some of the legacy councils, we provide a lot more clarity in the new constitution about how we deal with motions and how we deal with amendments and the rights of proposers, seconders, and in particular the point about the right of reply. Again, there's, you know, it's a lot clearer in this constitution on page 84 about the circumstances where members can have a right of reply, and also where there's points around procedural points as well. But again, where there's any specifics, you know, more than happy to have a look at those and see if we can improve. Some of it may also be, I think for us, also recognition about the constitution in terms of how it's constructed is trying to be as plain English as possible. I think some of the points as well, and you know, I'll certainly take this as an action to look more at, is some of the training that we can provide for members outside of the meetings, particularly things like the council procedures, to work through how the motion procedure works in a practical sense. But I think there might be something for us to look at as officers about how we can help break down some of these processes in perhaps a more sort of plain English version through training.
Thank you, Chair, for your forbearance. It was just that difference between sometimes it will arise from debate, so that obviously wouldn't have written notice, and sometimes it doesn't, and how you have that differential between the two, I think would be helpful.
If there's no further comments, can I point you to the recommendation, which is on page 67? The council approves the changes to the council constitution part 1C. Council procedure rules are set out in appendix C, appendix 2 of this report. All those in favour?
Chair, can I just say the recommendation says that the council approves. Should it have said this committee approves?
So approves, because we're just making our, yeah, it's council the decision making body on this one. I think, yeah. All those in favour? And I'm going to second. Do we have a proposer? Sorry, Andy, I do apologise. I lost the plot there. And seconded by Stephen Pugsley. I do apologise. Note to self. Okay, all those in favour? Thank you. That's carried then. Thank you. Item number 7 then, which is review of part D4 and D5 of the council's constitution. And this relates to the licensing and regulatory committee. Everyone? Okay. In terms of reference and hearing procedure, pages 153 to 204. Just remember, we had a really lively, interesting debate on this about licensing at the workshop we had a couple of weeks ago. Scott, do you want to introduce the report?
Only briefly, Chair, if you'll forgive me, I'm conscious I've just presented on the other two items. And again, in terms of work on this, don't want to steal the thunder of certainly some colleagues, certainly particular colleagues in our licensing services and legal services have led on this work in conjunction with councillors Carswell and Kravis in terms of the existing arrangements for licensing and regulatory committees. I can't see from my screen, but I'm hoping that Jack Godley's online. If he is, I'd probably ask Jack Godley just to go through a summary of the work that we've done, but also more importantly, some of the proposed changes that we've identified with members.
Do you want to sort of do a bit of introduction, sort of share a little bit of the flavour of the work you've been doing on this?
Yes, good afternoon, Chair. We've just gone to the first part of what we've done, and that was to do with the licensing and regulatory committee membership that we had there in terms of reference. There was a couple of changes that's made there, which you can see in the documents there with the track changes. Main ones there is all councillors must have received the training that's come out really from central government there to make sure that members of the licence committee are fully trained. Also, just going on through that there, in terms of reference, it's just really in relation to the policies that they will be looked at and passed through by a licensing committee, apart from the licensing and gambling policies, which need to go to full council as part of statute. It then goes on to terms of reference for the subcommittees. There's two subcommittees. One is the regulatory subcommittee, which will deal with everything apart from the Licensing Act 2003 and the Gambling Act 2005, as they are set in statute. The other licenses that we issue, such as taxis or street trading, they're discretionary, so they will come through the regulatory subcommittee. And the licensing subcommittee have the same terms of reference as well. So the changes there, I think, are all self-explanatory, but I'm more than happy to take any questions on these terms of reference.
Very much. Thanks for that introduction. Again, I'd like to pay tribute as well to the work that the Working Party did, particularly Simon, and Marcus. Simon was here at the workshop. He gave his notice of apologies. He couldn't make it today, but he gave a good resume of the work they've been doing on the licensing Working Party at the workshop a couple of weeks ago. Thank you. Members who would like to open up and make any comments regarding any potential review of the Licensing Regulatory Committee in terms of reference? Hugh Davis.
My question, please, to our friend there is, have we put all the 4 districts together now? Because the taxis in Bridgewater operated different to West Somerset, etc. So have those been put into situation? So we're speaking to one item. So they're not all changed. They've all got different conditions with their running in the different districts.
That's a really interesting point, and you know the taxi policy is always very interesting and sometimes often contentious. I think that is relevant, but I'm not sure it's covered by the remit of this actual review of the terms of reference. But
I could answer that, Chair. Yeah, by all means, I'm more than happy to answer that. This particular subject here, what we're dealing with today, is purely to do with the Constitution and terms of reference for the Licensing and Regulatory Committee, and also the licensing subcommittees and the regulatory subcommittees. In relation to the policies, the licensing policy and the gambling policy have now been through full council, and they are now adopted as Somerset policies, Somerset Council policies. The taxi policy is being worked on. That will take a little bit longer, but we aim to bring that all together within the next year, along with street trading policies as well.
Will be an ample opportunity and a further meeting for us to all discuss, you know, the licensing policy regarding taxi fares around the county. Good. Okay. Other members who'd like to comment? Maddie Chilcott.
Thank you. General question, really not specific to this paper, Chair. When I started reading the first bits of the paper today, we went through the current constitution, the proposed constitution, and then on to the track changes. Well, I read the current ones, started reading the proposed ones and was trying to work out what the difference was between the current and proposed, only to find as I carried on reading. We then had a track changes paper. So just moving forward, I wonder whether we could just have track changes, because that actually gives you everything you wanted to know and would have saved me probably a couple of hours of my time. So not specific to this, but generally.
You've got a comment, Scott, but I think we hear you.
And I move the recommendations at 2.12.
For that. Richard Wilkins. All those in favour? That is carried. Thank you. And we move on then to item number 8, which is review of parts 1, 2 of the Council's Constitution, the Officer Scheme of Delegation. I'd like to point you to report page 205 to 268. And again, falling on you again, I'm afraid, Scott, to produce this report.
Thank you, Chair. And again, hopefully members will be already aware that the Officer Scheme of Delegation is a key document. It provides detail on the arrangements for the delegation of authority to officers to carry out the Council's various functions, principally on a day-to-day delivery of services. We have, as part of the review of the Constitution, also included the Scheme of Delegation as part of that process. Generally, what's come through the review is a lot more what I would call almost housekeeping arrangements, whereby some of the functions, as the new council has been operating, some of the functions between directors have moved between those directors. So a number of the proposed changes are more just recognising how those functions have moved. And I'll probably cite an example. One is land charges, which was previously, I believe, under the Service Director for Strategy. And again, that under the scheme, you'll notice is now proposed. Obviously, it's then moved under the Service Director for Economic Development. Again, if I probably just draw your attention through to paragraph 3.7, which is on page 207 of your pack. And again, 3.7, just summarising a lot of the work that we've done during the first year. We've undertaken both a member survey in terms of the arrangements that we've been operating, but also an officers survey as well in terms of the scheme of delegation, decision-making arrangements. And again, that's really important just to help review, understand where things need some changes. We've also looked at how we can improve some of the guidance to officers, both in terms of writing reports and also in terms of just their awareness of the process that the council has in place. We've also been supporting a number of our directors in terms of some of these sub-delegation arrangements that they can put in place. And again, also in terms of some of the report templates as well, and just making some tweaks, particularly on the back of feedback, to help try and smooth and improve processes throughout the year. And again, you can see in paragraph 3.8 some of the key points of that feedback and some of the areas we've targeted. Hopefully you'll see, certainly in terms of the track changes, most of them really are derived from just some of those functional movements between directors. I think the only other one for me is just to flag that clearly where we've done some work on, say, the committee's terms of reference, there's also been a sort of consequential impact on some of the delegations to officers as a result of that. So again, you'll see that particularly in terms of the section around some of the planning delegations as well. But other than that, Chair, that's a summary in terms of the proposed review and minor changes to the scheme of delegation.
Jack Godley, online, you had your hand raised. Do you wanted to say something on that, or was it historic hand which hadn't come down from the previous item?
No, it's just on that, Chair, because just going back to item 7, we didn't cover Appendix 5, which was another amendment. There was 2 documents within item 7.
What can I ask your guidance on this, or Claire? I think they were all covered in the whole recommendation, weren't they? I think Councillor Pugsley and did move that we moved the recommendations of the whole report, didn't we, on that item?
Okay, Chair, my mistake then.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair. First question is 3.7 on page 207. It says throughout 23-24, the monitoring officer and head of governance and democratic services have undertaken a members survey and officers survey to review the operation of decision-making arrangements. I would love to have known a little bit more about the survey, actually. And quite often when a survey is referenced, you'll have some feedback, sort of figures, comments that people have made. Don't know if I've missed it elsewhere or whether it has been anywhere for members to see, but I would have found that interesting. It also highlights the need for mandatory training on decision making. And for me, when I was previously a portfolio holder, this was probably the one area with most uncertainty with staff that I experienced as a councillor. So I very much welcome the need for mandatory training, because I think there's a lot of sometimes misunderstanding amongst the staff, especially when it's a member of staff that hasn't dealt perhaps with a key decision previously. So I think that support would be welcome. Next one's on page 228, and I was just struggling a little bit with, can you talk me through the track changes for the up to 5 million officer decisions? Because there was bits crossed out then, it felt like there was a lot of movement on that. It's that 32.2. Can someone just talk me through why the sort of big changes in movement in those figures there? That's my next question.
To help Mandy out there.
Certainly, so hopefully, certainly in terms of that latter point, the proposed change is to reduce the delegation from 5 million to 1 million. Apologies if that's not clear enough in terms of how that track, but the intention is, yes, to reduce that delegation to officers, which therefore will mean any decisions above that figure will either fall to a lead member or in most instances to the executive as a collective body.
That's quite a big move. I was just trying to understand perhaps the thought behind that, because you tend to put delegation figures up, not bring it down substantially. I'd just like to understand perhaps the reason for that.
Much of the driver around some of those changes are linked to the next item, which is around the financial regulations, but I think they also reflect the existing situation that the council has been in for the past 6 months, which is the declaration of a financial emergency. So again, I think it's just ensuring we've got appropriate controls and clearly strong member oversight where there is expenditure that's proposed to be taken over certain limits. So that's been the main driver of those changes, and that sort of complements the work that again we've reported through, not least to which audit committee, in terms of the various control boards, including the spend control board. So it's all part of a suite of balancing decision making, particularly where there are high values of proposed spend.
Can I just come back, Chair, to link a question in? So if I link that then to page 250 and item 220, the flip side of that for me is that felt like a huge amount, because you're talking about 499,000 potential over 10 years, which is nearly 5 million. It's 220 on page 250. That to me actually felt a high figure, whereas the other one we'd actually brought down. So just to comment on that, it felt high, especially if it's a 10-year licence you were talking about.
Again, my understanding, certainly as part of the review, part of this is about balancing. So part of the financial emergency is also prioritised work in terms of assets, and in particular progressing the disposal of assets at pace. So a number of these delegations are designed to also help facilitate that approach. So in terms of the asset disposals, that's also directly linked to the proposed changes in the next item in terms of the financial regulations. So many of those ones are informing the changes you've got here.
Thank you, Chair. It's really interesting because I'll talk about some of those items in the next item, but they feel to be going the other way. So for me, it's just about a bit of, it's a little bit inconsistent is what I'm saying.
Goldstone.
Thank you. This maybe just be a bit of a word pedantry issue. And given that we're potentially talking about such large amounts, one of the things that's mentioned with delegated powers is in consultation with relevant lead member. would there be any merit in adding in consultation and agreement? It is highly unlikely that during a consultation with the lead member that there's going to be disagreement with, with relevant officer. However, you never know, and so I just wonder if that should be specified rather than, or at least considered to be specified, that the lead member does actually fully 100% provably agree with that consultation and discussion. Thank you.
Point. Scott or David? Which one?
I mean, the existing wording is almost one of those sort of implied arrangements. I think the only thing to bear in mind, though, delegations are therefore to empower the individuals within parameters, but not necessarily with almost a sort of veto control arrangement. And again, it's something that if the committee feels it's something that you would like to consider further, or something you want to recommend as a change, that's clearly within your gifts. It's just certainly in terms of arrangements and based on our peer councils, that's quite typical in terms of how the wording's set out there.
Like I say, it's quite pedantic, but it just, to me, doesn't give that absolute guarantee of accountability to the lead member. In terms of, we are talking, in some occasions it's a less relevant amount of money, but when it's a lot of money, it's good. It would be good to know that the lead member does agree and wasn't just consulted. It can be read in different ways, I suppose, but that's up to the committee to discuss, and I'm quite happy to just stand down and take it as read.
Any comments, or we would wish to move to the recommendation, members? Do you have a proposer for the recommendation? Does anybody else wish to speak?
I propose that we discuss it. If anybody wants to just say, no, leave it, you're good, then that's absolutely fine.
Does anybody wish to continue the debate then on this one? Stephen.
I think Officer Wooldridge has made the point that this could actually be part of the consideration going forward, to look at further. As ever, is the law of unintended consequences. You can make an immediate change today and then suddenly find actually it opens up a can of worms we hadn't envisaged. So I think what Mr. Wooldridge was suggesting was that this perhaps could be part of further consideration going forward, because the Constitution is a living and dynamic document, and this could be part of the consideration for the next phase.
Constitution rights then is a living document, and any sort of changes which are implemented on the 22nd of May, they'll need time to bed down. Some will work better than others, and some will need review either at an earlier or later stage. We're not going to set in stone for 10, 20 years. It's you said, it's a living document all the time, and they to see what works well and doesn't work well. Richard Wilkins.
I do suspect if there's any differing points of view that Emily is suggesting, it will be very well flagged by the lead member and jumped up and down about. I tend to agree with Stephen on this. Perhaps we've just considered the wording in the future. It's not, for myself, I've not been in that position, so I can't say that's been a problem, because it hasn't yet. So I don't know how it would play out.
Andy Chilcott.
Just going back to my previous question, really, we've just talked about track changes today, and I didn't get a response to when are we going to look at the rest, because it's just a really fine focus on a few bits today, but we haven't had that oversight of everything else. So when will that happen?
I mean, again, just for clarity, in terms of proposed changes to the council's current constitution, they are everything that's in today's meeting. There are no other track changes that are going to suddenly appear at the AGM. So again, just for clarity, everything that we've been working on is here today. I think for the work programme, which is a later item, I think there's something to return to for the committee in terms of what other parts of the constitution would the committee like officers then to prioritise during the forthcoming year, to then bring back to this committee to then recommend subsequently to council.
Thank you, Chairman. I suspect with some of the changes coming down the lines with transformation and restructuring the council into a smaller organisation, which has already been talked about, I suspect that this is a subject that we'll be coming back to sooner rather than later.
Members, notwithstanding the discussion we've had, and they will be encompassed within the report which goes to full council, are we content then to move to the recommendation at this stage? Proposal, please.
So can we put the caveat in that it will come back to the committee for this to be rediscussed and made sure that we've, gone through it with a bit more of a tooth comb than just take it as read? Is that acceptable?
If it's helpful, again, it might be something just to pick up as part of the work programme, but I think Councillor Osborne's point is particularly pertinent, which is recognising the live improvement and transformation programme. I'd suggest that this committee will definitely be needing to look at this scheme during 24-25 with impending organisational change.
Is that okay, Emily? For you?
Oh, I'm
Sue.
Go on, Sue.
I'm happy to support Emily that there is a record in there or a caveat that we do continue to review this, and also recognition in here that we may have to visit this sooner rather than later because of the impending, what will be huge changes to this council. That does need to be recognised somewhere within the recommendation.
Are you satisfied then that Scott's explanation that this will be reviewed at an early stage in the year 24-25 of the work programme?
I think it needs to be confirmed in writing as well for the public record.
I was just going to add in, and apologies, just going back to, you'll see it on the website, and I'm one of the culprits in part, which is one of the supplemental papers, which is the covering report, has got an additional paragraph ahead of the recommendations that makes specific reference to the scheme of delegation will need to be reviewed as part of the improvements and transformation programme. The intention is, subject to this committee's consideration and approval, if the committee agrees the proposals, that report with that paragraph will go forward to the AGM meeting.
I'm happy with Scott's explanation. I think I possibly overlooked that paragraph. It's quite easy to do so, or the implications of them until you come to a discussion. So I'm, happy that we go forward to the AGM, but I do think what Emily has raised should stand, but not necessarily the extra bit I was going to add on to it.
I know by the close of the meeting we might have lost the will to live, but it is actually only item 13. And if we can bear in our minds that when we get to item 13, we could even put review of officer delegation proposed for the 5th December meeting or whatever, we can actually just hold it there for the next hour. And indeed it can, but just to actually put it as part of the work programme when we get to item 13. Well, when we get there. Is that right?
Item number 9 then is review of part 17 of the Council's Constitution Financial Regulations, pages 269 to 334. And I'm going to invite Jill with us, Jill Byron. Hi, Jill with us. Sian's going to pick this up. Sian's online. I saw you online earlier. Welcome, Sian. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you.
Good, thank you. Do you want to sort of introduce this report? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Sian Kenny. I am interim financial governance lead as part of Finance and Procurement Service. Since the publication of the agenda and the reports, supplement 3 has been published and amendments are highlighted in yellow in the report, and they specifically relate to sections 16 and 17 in the financial regulations, and the revisions are in the appendix 1 of the supplement report. So the financial regulations are they outline the principles and rules for all financial matters closely linked to the scheme of delegation, as we've just discussed, and also the contract standing orders, which aren't there aren't any changes being proposed in relation to the contract standing orders, but they also include accountabilities for financial decision making. They have been prepared in accordance with the principles that are set out in the SIPFA Financial Management Code, which is the local authority standard for financial management. And so we've undertaken a review of the financial regulations against best practice guidance, against the code, and it also ensuring that they dovetail with other governance documents. There has been engagement and involvement across finance, procurement, HR, internal audit, strategic asset management, and governance and democratic and legal services, as all of those services and lead officers are part of the financial regs in terms of the accountabilities for specific service directors. In accordance with good practice, the officers have undertaken a review of the operation of regulations, and the recommendations are being set out as track changes in Appendix 1. I just wanted the committee to note that any punctuation and grammatical changes have not been tracked, and the titles listed at the top of the second page of the report, which is page 4 of the supplement, have been changed but not tracked in the document. This was to try and keep the document as tidy as possible. So the track changes are really where we are seeking to change context or add or make amendments to the existing financial regulations. And paragraph 3.3 of the report draws members' attentions to the specific changes. I think that's all in terms of an introduction, and Jill and I are both here. Jill's in the room, hopefully, to take committee feedback, comments, and answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Sean. Jill, do you want to add anything into that at this stage? But you're obviously here to help us out with any questions or comments. Thank you. Members. Jill.
Chair, I'm not sure what to do with this because I've got a large number, and I know we've discussed, for example, in our working group at length, the planning side of the Constitution, but there hasn't been as much debate on the finance side of things and the financial regulations, and I would have probably welcomed that. I don't know where you want me to go because I've got a list of 13 things.
Well, yes, it's going to be 2 or 3. I don't know now. I'm only being facetious and silly. Good point. I mean, it's going to take an awful long time. I want to read all 13 out, but what do we think? So it's an opportunity for, do you want them all aired here today, or can Jill and Sean, you could read them out, and then perhaps Sean and Jill could pick these up in writing afterwards? How do we wish to pick this up?
I don't mind. I can, I think I've got it saved at home. I could copy and paste them.
Could you do that?
But I've spent the time doing it, and they're all, I think, relevant issues. And like I said, we haven't had a long debate on the financial regulations as we have had others. So I'll take your advice, Chair.
I think as the result potentially of any changes, we do need to hear them today. Is that okay? I think upon reflection. Yeah.
Okay, I'll go as quick as I can. Okay, page 276 in blue, it talks about a register, for a waivers register. I've not come across that before, so first question is, and it isn't included there, is that audited by anybody? First question. Second one, page 277, it talks about in the event that this council calls a financial emergency. I think we've had one. So I'm just wondering whether that needs to be reworded to reflect that. Page 277 also, it's stated that any required additional financial controls are reported to the audit committee, which is fine. But then in the list of the audit committee's works, that is not included in it. So there needs to be consistency. If it's mentioned that the audit committee do it, it then needs to be in the audit committee list of things that they do. Page 283, the risk management is an integral part of corporate governance framework, which we know, and I know there's a lot of work going on with the lead member with regards to risk. And it talks about appropriate mitigations. What it doesn't talk about is where those appropriate mitigations are not effective, which I think has been covered well in other places. Page 285, the fraud key principles, point 4, all officers and members have access to counter fraud and corruption training and guidance. Previous conversations have led me to believe that that was going to be mandatory. Fraud is everybody's responsibility, and I'd just like to know whether that has been incorporated in training on entry to the authority, because it just says that it's available. It doesn't say that it's mandatory. Page 287, you've added 1 point to ensure that council can meet its statutory duties. I think we had a debate at the executive last week. Statutory is almost impossible to work out, and I'm just wondering whether that you shouldn't be using the phrase statutory services and costs of, because I don't think we can do that as a council. I think that's been widely acknowledged. Page 289, we use executive throughout this constitution. Point 17 says executive and then executive again. The first time it's referenced, I think, is to do with the executive, and the second is the senior leadership executive. And I think the dual use of executives right throughout the constitution is totally confusing for the readers, because you don't know if you're referring to the executive or the staff, if you like, executive members. So don't know where you go with that, but in that page 289.17 it's mentioned twice and you've got no way of telling the reader which is which. Page 290, the bottom of the page, there are track changes there, and you're including savings, and you've done that in several places. If you're including savings, should you also be talking about income, which hasn't happened throughout the document. Page 292.16, I can't make a word of sense of it, so that's probably page 292.16. I read it about 3 or 4 times, and there's some words in there that might be wrong, but it doesn't quite make sense. Page 297 talks of the capital programme. Given the financial emergency, it does not talk about keeping it under review and pausing or stopping if unaffordable. And I cannot really see any mention of the action points that have been put in place to deal with the financial emergency. And I'd say the financial emergency and what we're doing is really not reflected anywhere throughout this document. I was expecting to see some reference to the boards, etc., that we've now got in place. Due to the financial emergency, they're not in here. Page 312, I was expecting the Property and Investment Income Executive Subcommittee to be mentioned. As it's a subcommittee of the executive, it hasn't been. Page 3158, delegation to the Service Director for Asset Management. When will this? Why has 10 been removed? So that's a big item that's been removed from the document. I wanted to understand why. Page 318, income disposal, it says shall be credited to the cost centre. So this is capital receipts, and that they're credited to the capital receipts reserve and used to fund the capital investment budget. My understanding was this was slightly different given our capitalisation directive. Again, I don't think that's reflected there. Page 3192 does not make sense, as each sentence starts with to, which doesn't make sense with the beginning sentence. And where's the pension fund information gone? Because it's all crossed out. Sorry, that's my list. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Very thorough. Sean or Jill, how would you like to? Very good, very thorough. For full marks for reading reports and making copious notes. Jill or Sean, how do you want to deal with that? I mean, it may be.
I'm sorry.
Very difficult to sort of answer all of them, but.
I've tried to write them all down, so if Councillor Chilcott wouldn't mind just popping them in an email after the meeting. I think there's some general things that Jill and I could probably cover now, and based on my scribbles, I might try and cover some of them, and I might have to take some of them away and provide you with a written response. In terms of the points made about the financial emergency, the financial regs, they are there in what I'm going to describe as normal circumstances, are normal financial regulations based on best practice. What the regs have now pulled in at the very start of the document is to allow overriding powers to be put in place should a financial emergency be declared by the local authority. Those overriding powers, which would include the boards, the control boards that are in place, and some of the specifics around the capital programme, aren't documented in the financial regulations, because at any point coming out of a financial emergency, we'd revert back to the financial regulations. So the financial emergency powers are written into the financial regulations to enable that to happen, but the financial controls, the additional or superseding financial controls that are put in place that potentially override the financial regulations are documented in other documents within the financial emergency. Does that make sense?
Thanks. There's no reference to that in there though.
Okay, we'll try and make that more explicit, because we did add it, we added the kind of the powers in at the very beginning, and I think that was what one of your points was, it number 3, in section 2, so page 277.3, in the event that the council declares a financial emergency, section 151 may impose and implement additional financial controls and is responsible for communicating them to all employees, provided that details of those additional financial controls are reported to the next available meeting of the audit committee and full council. So we can try and make that more, if that wasn't clear, that was what that paragraph was alluding to.
Thank you. Just coming back on that, these are our financial controls for all of the finance and how it's operated in the authority. And I think if we've got a new set of rules that we were operating under, which we are, you know, quite rightly, there's been a lot of controls and checks and boards brought in. They need to be sort of captured somewhere. And all it says in here that in the event of the council declares an emergency, things might happen. And I just would have expected some reference to them or a link to somewhere that referenced them, so that you could understand why some of the new financial controls we're operating under, what has given you, if you like, the powers to do that.
Okay, I can take that on board and maybe look at that paragraph or add in the link or reference to where those additional financial controls are held. And
Sian, it's going to be impossible because I read them out so quickly to save everybody's time.
The pensions.
I'll send them to you.
Yeah,
Is that
okay, thank you.
I think they're very relevant points, but I think to get I mean, you're doing very well, Sian, but to get to get the real clarity on this, it would be if Mandy's okay with that and committee are okay with that, then if you could supply written copies to Sian and Jill, and then the written answers be circulated to all members of the committee as well. Is that satisfactory to everybody?
Thank you, Sian. I sort of apologise, but
no, there's no need to apologise. No, there's nothing to apologise for at all. Thank you. If you're, thank you for being accommodating for suggesting, you know, allowing that way forward. Thank you. Any other members who wish to? Oh, Dawn.
I'm just not clear what we're going to be able to vote on that basis then.
Additional points.
Thank you, Chair. I think if it's helpful to the committee, what we can do is introduce a further recommendation to introduce delegation, perhaps to myself, in consultation with Jill and the relevant lead member, to make the changes subject to this committee, or in consultation with yourself, perhaps, as Chair. So what I would suggest is Councillor Chilcott provides our changes to Sian and Jill. We then have a debate. If there are any subsequent changes to the version that the committee has as a result of those observations, then a delegation can be provided to myself in consultation with yourself to make any further changes to the amended version of the Fin regs that will then carry the recommendation on to full council.
Right, thank you. Two, and they are two areas we've just been to, but slightly different. So these were points I wondered when reading through. So the waiver register, page 276, that's been referred to in regard to financial regulations. My question was just where will that register be? You know, what will happen to that register in particular? How will people see it, or is it to be reported somewhere? I feel that should be clear. And the other thing which I thought should be clear on the next page, 277, and it may be clear enough, so I'm just checking whether it is. So right at the top, in the event that the council declares a financial emergency, can I check that I'm correct to understand that as being the full council declares a financial emergency? Is that what that means?
I'll take away
It's
the
full
point about.
council.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Thanks,
It
Jill.
would be full council.
If you wish to pick that one up.
Sorry, was that addressed to me? I missed the start of that. I couldn't hear
Sorry,
online.
can you repeat that one, Dave? Sorry.
Yeah, this is page 276, the waiver register, which was mentioned earlier in relation to financial regulations being waived. What will happen to that register? Will it be published somewhere? Will it be reported? What happens to that register?
I will need to take that away because at the moment we have the waiver register within finance, and the section 151 officer oversees it. I need to check where that will go, and I'm assuming it would be audit committee, but I'd need to take that away. That's my assumption. I'd need to check that with Nicola Hicks as a service director and Jason Vaughan as a section 151, just to be clear. And I think I also need to make sure, because it was one of Councillor Chilcott's points as well, I think, is it audited? So I will take both of those points away together and make sure that the financial regulations are clear where that register sits, who holds it, who oversees it, whether it's audited and where it's held.
Chair, if it helps, that was my first question that I'll get a written response on.
To comment at this stage? No. Okay. Sue Osborne.
Thank you, Ross. Just for clarity, because Mandy raised a number of questions, and I wonder whether this paper is going to, once we have the written responses, whether this paper is actually going to come back to this committee, and also because finance is almost a specialist subject on its own, is whether it is worth sort of having a briefing on the financial regulations, because certainly finance isn't come naturally to me, and I would certainly welcome a brief on, so to have deeper understanding of what the regulations are and what our obligations are as members under those regulations, because members are referred to. So I think we need to be clear of what our responsibilities are as well.
David, do you want to sort of repeat back, you know, what we, to relation as well, the Councillor Johnson's question as well, relevant to this?
Yeah, so as proposed, the fin regs would not come back to this committee because you'd be providing a delegation to myself in consultation with the chair to make any changes arising as a result of the debate that we've had today. The only other alternative is that we don't take the fin regs to full council, and we provide a further opportunity for this committee to do some further work on that section of the constitution.
I think what Mr. Clark has suggested actually is a perfectly viable way forward, and there doesn't seem any reason not to bring the financial regs to full council. The points that Councillor Chilcott raised, on the whole, I think were ones that should be able to be addressed by the mechanism that you suggested. The only thing I'm still intrigued about, and Councillor Wilkins and I are sitting here still puzzling over this paragraph and whatever it's supposed to mean, it just does not make any sense to us whatsoever. So it would be very interesting to know what that should say. Yes.
Beautiful thing.
Sorry, yeah, I was named, so I thought I'd use the opportunity to test the, sorry, no. Yeah, I was, I haven't got the paragraph in front of me. Have you got it there? No, I've just shifted off it actually.
No, she's read it off to the dark.
Yeah, no.
292.
292. I think there's I think it's the word reduced should have the D removed, and then there are several commas that could be added to the sentence as well. Yeah, this is where it says general fund reserve reduced. If that was just general fund reserve, comma, then reduce, and then there'll be another comma after budget setting. That might help. I don't know whether that is what you were trying to say, though.
Apologies, I'm struggling with when the mics go on and off. What page number and what paragraph number was it?
Page 292, paragraph 16.
16.
Yeah, oh, point 16.
You able to help us?
Yeah, I,
So
I
in
think
the-
this is something that's already in our financial regulations, and it clearly needs maybe a couple of extra words. So we will look at that. This isn't a change that we've made. It's something we've been operating with for a year. So I think it does need picking up.
Would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll need to reread it, but I think it's supposed to say in the unusual circumstance where a proposed use of unearmarked general fund reserve is reduced below the range approved by council as part of budget setting, this must be approved by council. Executive may approve allocations within the approved range.
That sounds fulfilling. Okay. Okay, are we happier with that now? And are we still happy with the way the form of delegation, the way we deal with this report, has been outlined by David? Is that okay? And explained to Councillors Johnson and Councillors Osborne. With that in mind, are we then content to move to the note the report and agree to adopt the fin regs set out in the Appendix 1 with immediate effect? Bear in mind the caveat of the delegation scheme, yeah.
Sorry, Chair, again, the report is written as if it's the report to full council, so again, it needs to be that this committee makes a recommendation to full
Yeah,
council.
recommendation, sorry, not note, yeah.
In terms of the delegation, I've just scribbled something down, so it's committee provides delegation to the monitoring officer in consultation with the chair of the Constitutional Governance Committee to make any further suggested changes to the fin regs arising as a result of the debate to form part of their recommendation to full council.
Members content with that, Richard? Did you have a second? Sorry about the confusion there. I do apologise.
Chair, just a point of order. I think where you've got these reports that are going forward, and I've picked up, I don't know how many times, you need a very, very short cover report to include the recommendation for the committee that it's coming to, because it makes more sense there.
Move on item number 10, is a review of the Council's Constitution Planning Committee terms of reference and code of good practice, and that is report on 335 to 478, a rather long report. We had a really thorough debate on this at the workshop, really helped and shaped, and some excellent intervention and question answering by Councillor Ros Wyke, and I have checked she's on the call, thank goodness. She's good. She was very, very good at that meeting. I know she's been intimately associated with this report as well. And we're very lucky to have in the room Scott, obviously, as well, and Alison Blom-Cooper, our head of planning as well. Alison, do you wish to say a few words to start off with?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to point members to supplement 2, which sets out the main changes that are being made. And you can see those changes again more clearly, I think, as track changes on pages 375 onwards. Just a couple of points, Chair, if I may. In terms of the remit of the Strategic Planning Committee, you've heard in response to the question raised by the 2 speakers earlier that the proposal is to change the remit to refer waste and mineral applications straight to committee. I'm not going to comment further on that because you've heard our response earlier. But I think what we didn't cover in the response to the questions was the remit in relation to biodiversity net gain. And just to make it absolutely clear that the intention is not for specific sites to go to the Strategic Sites Committee, where they're in relation to planning applications, they will still go to the Area Committee. The remit of the Strategic Planning Committee is to oversee the Council's programme of finding sites to deliver biodiversity net gain and the implementation, and in particular the call for sites, which is due to take place from May onwards this year. So that's set out on page 377, the proposed remit in terms of biodiversity net gain. The only other thing, Chair, that I wanted to point out is in response to consideration at great length by the chairs and vice chairs and chaired by Councillor Wyke, and then the subsequent discussion at the working group, taking account of members' responses to the questionnaire that was sent out. We have looked very carefully at the referral process, and there are significant changes being prepared both to referral process for divisional members and also for town, city, parish councils. And those are set out on pages 7 and 8 of the supplemental agenda. I'm happy to go through those if people want further explanation, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Martin Evans, do you wish to add anything at all?
Not at this stage, thank you, Chair.
We've got Martin, we've got Alison, we've got Ross online as well, who be able to help us out with this report as well. So I'm going to open this up to members. Sue Osborne, you're first, and then Henry Hobhouse, and then Dave.
Thank you. I'll just ask one question at this stage, but I do have other questions, but I'll refer the right to come back on those. What I'm curious to know, and I was one of the people that filled in the member survey, because at the last meeting of Constitution and Governance, I think myself and a colleague councillor actually requested that a survey was done, or all members were given a chance to engage, and it wasn't just left to the chairs and vice chairs. And I responded to that questionnaire. What I'm disappointed about, and what I'd like to know, is why were the results of the councillor survey, that report, and someone did send it to me half an hour before I left home, why was it not attached as an appendix to this particular Constitution and Governance report, so we can actually read that for ourselves and see whether the findings of that consultation actually accords with the recommendation, and if it, and where there are areas where there is discord between what is coming from the findings, particularly on chairs and vice chairs sitting or not sitting on area planning committees, for instance, why the findings from that report were not considered.
So when we bring discord, maybe we bring harmony. I don't even remember who said that.
Yes, I think we all know who said that, but the point is, it
should
have been,
isn't it? Yeah.
it is, and it should. This, I do feel that this particular paper should have been an appendix. One more wouldn't have made any difference. So members themselves can read what is in there and can draw their own conclusions.
You make a very fair point. Scott, you'd like to come in? Yeah, it's a fair point, Sue.
Again, happy to take that, certainly, and apologise. I think for certainly from officers, we'd hope that we did share the survey in the workshop on the 4th of April to all members. No, I mean, sorry, I mean in terms of all the paperwork that was sent out in terms of advance. And again, apologies in terms of that. I mean, again, if that's something which the committee feels would be valuable for full council to have as part of that, we can certainly take that away and include that as part of the papers that go forward to full council. I mean, some of the main bits hopefully are already summarised on in terms of the survey, particularly in terms of some of the key areas are going to be around, as shown on page 336. One of the things that particularly came through was from the survey results was whether there should be additional time allocated for local divisional members to speak at the committee over and above all the other types of speakers at planning committee meetings. And on balance, the planning chairs, vice chairs and that working group felt that actually it was fairer to keep every speaker at 3 minutes rather than grant one particular category with more time. I mean, that was one of the things I'll probably draw out that was different from the survey of members compared to what the recommendations include.
And shared the reports of the survey at the workshop meeting, didn't we? Yeah. Except Sue hadn't seen it. Sue,
Can I
do you want to
just
come
come
back?
back on that and certainly strongly recommend, Scott, that you do add this as an appendix, so members can see what was decided and they can draw their own conclusions in what I'm sure could also be a lively debate at full council. But I will come back on my other questions if they're not picked up by other speakers.
We've got Henry, then Dave, and just to let Martin know online, I haven't forgotten him, I've noticed him, he'll be after Dave. So Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk about quite a unpopular subject, which is the rights of way and the way they are in strategic planning. This is number 2.1 on your supplement 2. I want to start off by saying my interest starts because my grandfather wrote the paper from this, or next door, as the chair of the county council on dealing with natural parks and rights of way. The problem I have is that this is not a planning issue. This is a highways issue. And I want to thank Richard Wilkins because he's now got changed and made legal the applications for this particular subject, which we have somewhere around 250 illegal applications that were accepted by the previous council incorrectly filled in. They're still not being correctly filled in, and I would like to propose that we need to move the rights of way decision making to a different body, and we need to ensure that that body is checking the applications as well as deciding the outcome of the decisions. Now, unlike planning, and I've been doing both for 20 years, you don't have a 300 to 400 year historical information that is required to do a rights of way. Therefore, when you've got a planning, and I'm not arguing about the 3 minutes on planning, but if you enforce that on strategic planning, you're not giving a chance for the defender, to use a better word, to be able to give the evidence that is required to ensure that there is a fair outcome. The officers, quite rightly, aren't restricted, but you are asking a farmer or a landowner to be able to answer the officer's application in 3 minutes. And it really, really isn't fair. Thank you.
Henry. Scott, not Scott. Alison or Martin, do you want to pick that one up?
I'm sorry, it's not really within my remit.
Mr. Chairman, it's not in her division. This is not a planning problem. This is Richard Wilkins highways. That's my argument about the strategic planning.
Saying then that this is something perhaps Richard, you and Richard can pick up off stage and discuss.
Saying is we've got a strategic planning committee dealing with a non-planning issue, which should never ever have been in a planning committee to deal with it. And the rules of the planning committee make it grossly unfair on the person who's trying to defend 300 or 400 years of history in 3 minutes.
Looking at the officers, any officer wishes to comment on that at all, or help us out, or? Scott.
I mean, just to help, I mean, I'm not, I suppose just for the benefit of the committee, in terms of rights of way functions, village green functions, the new constitution set out from the outset that those functions would be part of the strategic planning committee's functions of work. I know Councillor Hobhouse's point, which is a challenge in part around whether that particular committee should actually have those functions, or whether the council should consider in part, if I'm reading listing part, whether the council consider establishing a separate committee to deal with rights of way matters, which I believe is one of the points that Councillor Hobhouse is making. That's clearly an option that's available to the council. As part of the review though hasn't picked up that as one of the recommendations. It doesn't mean that it's something which the committee couldn't consider, but the review has just sought to clarify that yes, the strategic planning committee's functions do include rights of way and village green matters, and it's sought to just provide greater clarification. I think Councillor Hobhouse's point about is that still the right place for rights of way matters to be determined is a separate question in part, which is one for the council around, does the council believe that this strategic planning committee can deal with those matters, or should it establish a standalone committee like some other councils do for rights of way determinations? Again, that's a choice for the council. That's not been picked up as part of the review, though. I would flag that because we've not identified, certainly in terms of volume and capacity, that there's an issue with strategic planning committee being able to deal with this. So that's certainly not something we've picked up over the first year.
Thank you. I can actually not jump the queue, but I think Ros, if she was in the room, I'd be calling her in now to try and pick up some of these
Thank
points. Yeah, and I'm going to ask Ros, do you want to quickly?
Yeah.
Are you able to
yes,
direct Henry's comments?
Thank you, Ross. Very happy to do so. Scott is right. It's not been raised formally and wasn't considered within the review of the Constitution in terms of planning. However, I'm more than happy to take this away with my colleague Richard Wilkins and look at the appropriate home for it. It may well stay within strategic planning, or it may need to be somewhere else, or we may need to handle it differently. I'm quite open about it. And don't feel at all territorial, so please don't interpret that. And if I may, can I take it as an action point to take it away and discuss it with Richard and the officers? Because I'm more than happy to look at the situation again.
That's a really helpful intervention, Ros. Henry, are you okay then? Perhaps off stage then, that Ros and Richard take this away in conjunction with yourselves and look at the points that you've made.
I have absolutely no problem if somebody's looking at it. I would like to be involved in some of the discussions.
And we could also add it to the work programme in terms, you know, we can. It'd be interesting one to come back and review in the future about where we've got with this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few comments and some questions. I'll cover most of them first. I've then got a big area which I'm guessing others may have as well, but I think if I could come back to that and do the other ones initially. Firstly, just some observations. They're not really questions, although if my observations show I'm misunderstanding anything, that may be helpful. I'm a little bit surprised, and obviously I'm not usually on this committee, but I do take an interest in planning matters and so on. And I'm a little surprised and how the council normally functions. How the review and the workshop for this item have been done. From what I can see, the review has involved the chairs and the vice chairs of planning committee and some others, but it's not involved the ordinary members of planning committee. It's not involved other members who may certainly speak at planning committee but not sit on it. So big sections of interest seem to have not been involved, and I also wonder how represented the political groups have been, and it may just be one, but I don't know. And this just strikes me as really odd. What's going on here? And the workshop as well. Well, I haven't a clue about that. Who went to the workshop? We keep being told about this workshop. Well, no, I haven't a clue about that. What was it? But anyway, we deal with what we've got in front of us, but we're told about all this hidden stuff going on behind the scenes, which
a little unfair. But
well, it's just okay. Sorry,
think that's a little bit unfair. I think the survey, there has been member involvement, and I'm going to call Ros in to answer it much better than I am. But I think from the chair, the member survey was there in place to gather as much information from the individual members as possible. And also the workshop, I think, was pretty well advertised. I need to check with Scott how well advertised. It was very well attended. How was it? Was it advertised to all members?
Ros, if I may just clarify, I know about the survey. That's fine. I'm not asking anything about the survey. The thing I don't understand is the review. Who was involved with? Well, I think we're told the review was the chairs and vice chairs of
chairs and vice chairs, and there was the working party.
But so we've been told that's what it was. It surprises me, and I'm just telling you that I'm surprised. And the workshop I don't know about. The survey I do know about. But it's only the workshop and the review. But they're just observations. I wasn't going to say anything further than that.
Ros, can you come in and answer?
Yes, surely. First of all, the chairs and vice chairs are the most knowledgeable group of people in terms of the procedure processes and the issues and challenges. The planning is not supposed to be political, but we do know that the planning committees are apportioned according to party, and certainly the chairs and vice chairs cover more than one party, and therefore I cite the chair of Planning North, who is a member, I believe, of the Labour Party, for instance. But politics hasn't come into this. This has been very much a working of experienced heads around planning. And in terms of the workshop, that was opened to everybody. It was well advertised by Democratic Services and got into many people's diaries. And it was well attended. And it was attended right across the political spectrum again. So, you know, just for reassurance, this hasn't been a one-party activity at all, nor has it been just a handful of people. The workshop was very deliberate meeting of all groups.
Well, memberships of the working party, that was made of. It was said they were terms of reference were agreed by this committee, and they were made up by chairs and vice chairs and members of this committee. I remember we talked about this at our meeting we had at Yeovil when we were looking for volunteers to come forward. I mean, it's a point. Okay, I understand, Dave, your frustration on that. I think in terms of going forward, when no doubt we will, you know, we've already talked about some of the stuff in the Constitution's a living document. We'll be looking at again in the next year, when undoubtedly we have member involvement and working parties again. Perhaps it would be a good idea to widen that potential membership to all members of the council and advertise it more widely.
Ross, if I may, I haven't got to my questions yet. So thank you for that. That's some further clarification, which is helpful. I still have my doubts. Perhaps I missed the workshop invitation. We do get a lot of email, but I didn't know anything about. I didn't know anything. I didn't get it. No, well, I didn't think I did. But never mind. Look, that's what's happened. I'm just observing that it seemed a bit odd, and often it's good to involve. You know, there's many stakeholder groups. And it's often good to involve those different stakeholder groups and things. And I've got quite big doubts whether they're involved. I've just noticed Alison's wish. Yeah.
No, not to worry. I just wanted to provide further clarification because we, as part of the review work, we surveyed 6 months worth of all the committees that ran and included a questionnaire at all those committees for members of the committee, for the agents and public attending and the officers, and the information gathered through those questionnaires and 6 months worth of questionnaires from all the committees fed into the review and the issues that we looked at. So we did involve other stakeholders in the information gathering. We also reviewed how many applications coming, how much time speakers were taking, and the issues that were raised. So we have a lot of data that sits behind the review as well.
to be fair, the working party's put an enormous amount of work, enormous amounts of expertise in terms of the officer leads on that, and also the chairs and vice chairs of the 4 committees across the area committees of the planning committee. So I think there was wide representation, and as Rosa said, I'm going to call back Rosa again to add in some comments, but it was drawn from people from many political colours across the political spectrum. Ros, do you want to come back?
Yes, I realise, and I must correct the probably an erroneous impression I gave. It was all members of the working group of the Constitutional Committee. It wasn't an invitation, if I'm correct, to all members of the council. And my apologies, I didn't mean to mislead you.
Great, Ros, and thank you for the clarification. Dave, you want to come back with your question?
Yeah, thank you. Right, so firstly, on page 394, so there's a question here, make sure I spot where it is. Yeah, so towards the top, it talks about applications for permission in principle. Now, apologies if I should know what those are. I'm particularly interested to know, does that include certificates of lawful development and prior approvals notifications? Will they be sent to, in my experience, can be of interest and known? So I would like to know whether that permissions in principle includes those. Then next page, page 395. Okay, so we've got here as a result, this is about referring to local councillors and a result of a substantial change. Now, this is a track change. It's taken off re-notification and put consultation. And again, I'm wondering quite what that means. And the bit I'm most keen to make sure happens is that there is notification. So I was a little bit worried that notification's been crossed out. So does consultation mean there will be direct notification to the local councillors of those when there is a substantial change, or we get, you know, I believe we need to know. So clarification on that, please. Page 418. Let's find this one. So, which is 5.7. Okay, yeah, and this again is just trying to understand the process. So local councillors can request a referral to the planning committee, and we can do it at the first stage an application is submitted, and now it's got this there's another chance to do it at 14 days. What I'm not absolutely clear on is this another chance to refer it to planning committee, or is this something that's got to be done as well as the earlier recall to make it go to a planning committee? You know, is it enough to do it just once at this stage, or do both stages have to be done? I'm not actually clear from my reading of it. So those are 3 questions there, and then reflecting things raised earlier, there was the questions about what gets referred to strategic planning. I think I'm reassured in what was said on the biodiversity net gain, that it's about the measures for its delivery, and the actual biodiversity aspects of planning applications, sort of the site-specific ones, they will be still fully dealt with by the area committee. I think that's what I understood. So that sounds reassuring on that one. I'm less reassured, I have to say, on the waste and minerals, and that's going to strategic planning. We've heard questions earlier on whereby the mineral ones in particularly apply to one area of Somerset, and I'm sure they can arise elsewhere, but in practice there clearly is a lot of them in one area. It does, to my way of looking, in line with what the speaker suggested, seem absolutely right that it should go to the area committee in that aspect, and it doesn't feel like good practice, and it's not a good look for it to be going to what feels like a central committee, which may be melting elsewhere, well away from the area that's applied. I'd be interested to hear what others say, and I suspect there may be other comments on that. But myself, as you gathered, I'd be minded to suggest that should stay where it is with strategic planning. So that's for now, if I may. But I have got a number of points I'd wish to make on the referral process, and I have concerns with what's proposed there, so if I can come back on those. Thank you.
So would you like to pick those up? What I'll do is, if I could come back to you, Dave, there are 3 or 4 other people want to speak, so I'll come back to you later in the debate for the other questions. But Alison, would you like to try and pick up some of the points and questions?
It's going to pick up the permission in principle point.
I'll
Martin Evans.
Martin, okay, yeah.
I'll start, Chair. The permission in principle, that's a relatively new mechanism. It's not certificate of lawfulness applications, and it's not related to prior approval applications under permitted development. It's an alternative consent route for obtaining planning permission for housing-led development, and it separates out the consideration of principle of development from the technical details of development. So it's similar to outline application, but it's a specific type of route to a planning permission. Just in relation to the comments about waste and minerals, clearly those applications are not limited to one particular area. For example, waste applications may be anywhere within the county, and the proposals are that where possible, the strategic committee will meet, if they're considering such an application, within the area in question. And I think the only other point I pick up was the question about whether notification means consultation and vice versa. I think what the answer to that is yes, it does. I'll go to my colleagues to pick up the rest.
On the notification and consultation aspect, it was basically changed because when we set up planning applications, if you are consulted on a planning application, you have 21 days to comment. It's in the legislation, it's a consultation. With lawful development certificates and a number of other types of applications, there's no requirement to consult sort of local members or parish or town councils. So in that case, we do send out letters, but they're notification letters to notify people that there is an application in that's a form of permitted development, so that they're aware of the application, but it's a different sort of mechanism, if you like. So the consultation it's an engagement that you have 21 days to respond to. The notification is just to let you know that there's a submission for lawful development or a form of permitted development, just for your attention, because we were getting correspondence from members where development under the permitted development criteria was being undertaken and members would have been unaware of it. So then notification letters. The second point about consultation and the 14 reconsultation and a potential 14 further days to comment. If you were raising a particular issue with an application, such as the size of the building, they submitted revised plans reducing the size of the building, we would reconsult. It would be up to you if you want to comment further. So it is a second chance to comment. If we don't receive a comment from you withdrawing your first objection, that would still hold. So it would go through the ACR route. But through the ACR route, if the amendment addresses the concerns you raised, obviously that will be the presentation to the chair and vice chair for them to decide if it goes to committee or not.
So just quickly, so the certificates of lawful development and the prior approval notifications, those will still be notifications going to members. Right, thank you for the clarification.
Any other comments before I move on to other speakers? Okay, Martin Dimmery, you've been very patiently waiting online.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for including me in this. I've got some serious reservations about minerals being discussed at the strategic planning. we made a specific, some of us made specific requests that minerals should go to planning, the area planning board, and certainly it's been said before, that these applications really only apply to one particular area of the county, and that's Planning East. And we were granted that opportunity to discuss planning applications. Now we find that on the cusp of one of the biggest planning applications to come before Somerset Council, or the county council previously, for many, many years, we're now having that opportunity taken away from us. And I'm a little bit uncertain about the members' survey, because whether I can't remember doing it or receiving it, or what it was or who it applied to, I don't know. But certainly I'd like to know the results in detail of that survey, and whether or not the question was actually asked. Do members agree that that minerals should be discussed at strategic planning, not at the planning board? I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Who would like to come back and thank you. Dawn.
Thank you. Just in terms of minerals waste, you would have heard from my colleagues earlier, minerals and waste applications do cover the whole of Somerset. Appreciate minerals, there's particular sort of preference for minerals in the east area, but waste applications cover the whole of Somerset. Minerals and waste are considered against the minerals and waste local plan for the whole of Somerset. And you know, it has already been set out that if there are planning applications related to mineral applications in certain areas, the strategic committee will be aimed to be run in those areas to enable accessibility.
Thank you. Helen.
Thank you. And to be clear, as the Minerals and Waste Planning Manager, we don't just have quarries in Area East, we also have extraction and licenses for other minerals in all of our geographic areas. It's not just the super quarries that we're talking about.
Helen. Scott.
Just to help shed some light as well, particularly in terms, you've talked a lot in terms of the constitution review about looking at some of our peer councils, again, just to our immediate peer councils, Wiltshire, Dorset, both of whom have strategic planning committees, both of whom operate in terms of determination of waste and minerals matters at their strategic planning committees rather than their area-based planning. So that we have also been looking at how others deal with these kinds of matters. That's not to say that we can't be different, but we have looked at how other councils operate. I think the other thing as well, just drawing on the member survey, and we have undertaken, we will include it, but just on the specific, because there was a question within the survey about, due to the size and complexity of waste and mineral planning applications, the proposal is that they be determined by the Strategic Planning Committee. Do you agree with this proposal? 26 of the responses said yes, 7 said no.
Long list of speakers here, so I'm going to get them in. Tony Locke.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to say congratulate you on how you answered the two public speakers to start with at the start of the meeting. I thought that was spot on. But firstly, this particular subject is proven, as it always does, as you know, how contentious planning is wherever you go, whether a parish, town, district, county in the past, now Somerset Council, it is always contentious. We have got to bring, and we are attempting to bring, the policies and the planning procedures together from 5 authorities for the whole of Somerset under one. I would urge all members and say that this review is just the start. It would have been nice if we'd have had it before the authority started, but we are now well over a year in. A lot of hard work by members and officers has been put into this review of planning. We are not saying it is 100% correct. There are probably tweaks which need to be made, and I would suggest that no matter what people's views are and how they feel about certain aspects of it, that this recommendation for the planning goes through in its entirety as it is, that this committee recommends acceptance, but with a caveat that it is brought back for a review after so many months, whether it be 6 or 9 months, for tweaks and for information to be made. As this is the second review I've sat on, and I know there's one other member who sat on a review and sitting in the room, and there's a couple online as well, I would suggest that way forward. You are never going to get planning right first time, and you are always going to have to tweak moving forward, but you have to start somewhere. And we are just trying to bring this in, which is fair and uniform for across the whole of the Somerset area. That is my all I would like to say, but to compliment everyone, of which I was part of, on this review, which is a lot of work went into it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tony. Good to see you as well. Michael Dunk.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, you've got a lot of work to do with this particular sort of afternoon. I'm sorry to interrupt, really. I just wanted to agree with a couple of the earlier speakers about the business of having strategic versus having the local groups, the local planning groups, oversee the waste and minerals. I think it's a difficult subject, but I think on balance, the democratic side of things, of having local accountable councillors who are able to decide these important issues for whichever region it is that's got minerals or waste or a quarry. And the point is that I think that's local accountability. I think that's important. Yeah, yes, the strategic can come and meet at various sort of areas, but I think it's more to do with the makeup of the actual committee that's important, and that is in the main taken from locally elected members for that area. I think that's the crux of the matter here. There were some interesting comments in that survey which you referred to, which actually sort of echo what I'm saying. The other thing that was interesting is that in that survey, it says the current, where are we? That's right, the current constitution states that the lead executive members are not barred from membership of the, no, that's not that, I've got the wrong, sorry, the current constitution provides that the chair, vice chair of strategic planning committee may not sit on any area-based planning committee. Do you agree with this? And the result was 30 in agreement, 3 not in agreement. So it's interesting with surveys. I mean, that's why I would question the wisdom of having the chair and vice chair sitting on a different area board. I think we must retain some separation on that. So I'm not in favour of the strategic overseeing the minerals. I think it's a local issue and it should be represented locally. They also had some questions about whether we should reduce the number of members on the planning board, and I don't think that's a sensible idea. But it's now listed as 11 to 13. Well, I don't know why it hasn't remained at 13, and I'd like an explanation of how that came about, but I think it's unwise. And that would also raise the question of both the committees being quorate 5. I think they should both be 5, and the planning area committee should be not 4 but 5, because they should be 13 in number. Anyway, that's my halfpenny worth. Thank you very much for listening.
No, thank you very much, Martin. Michael, thank you. Mandy Chilcott.
Thank you. Just a few points to raise. Firstly, just to recall from the previous meeting, I think we did try and, for Councillor Mansell's benefit, we did try and get some members of this committee to sit on that working group, and a vote was taken, and sadly it didn't get passed. So we did greatly debate it here, just to give that reassurance, didn't we, Chair? I'll just start at the end and sort of come back, if I may, just some points to raise. So the first one's 8.8F, which is on page 346. So we've removed the whole point that a parish, town or city council may request an extension of the time limit in which they must notify planning service they wish to refer a planning application. I'm fairly uncomfortable with removing that because I'm really conscious that we've got some really small but important parish councils in Somerset that might only meet every couple of months. And this sort of allowed them that flexibility to still discuss planning applications. So I'm uncomfortable with 8.8F being removed. The next question I wanted to raise was 8.6B. And it talks about referral to divisional members, and in my opinion, it should be not just the member that referred it, but also the other member in the division as well, so you're both aware. So that was my second issue. 8.4, local councillors, really within this document, is that too generic? Because a local councillor could mean a town or a parish councillor as well as a unitary councillor. I'm just wondering, to save confusion, whether reference in the document should be to a unitary local councillor as opposed to just a local councillor, because others might feel that they can also do it. 8.6A, this allows a general call-in. Does this run the risk that members can court public opinion without commenting on the planning merits of an application? That's just a question to pose, and that's 8.6A. 8.6C, just bring it up, sorry, following my. So 8.6C, is the meaning of major applications could be delegated even if divisional member has disagreed with an officer recommendation? So just some clarity, is that actually what it's meaning in 8.6C? And I'll hold there for a moment if I may, Chair.
Does any officer like to pick some of these points up at all, Alison?
Yeah, in relation to the last one, if it's a major application, it would automatically go to committee. There wouldn't be a referral process through the chair and vice chair. In terms of the comments about whether it's a divisional member or a local councillor, I don't feel strongly about that. I'd be guided by members as to which you want to go with. I'm just trying to find the other point. Is it D?
If I can help you, 8.8F, I feel quite strongly actually that we should still allow some flexibility to some of our smaller parishes, and that's all been deleted totally. 8.8F, that would be helpful to understand that some more.
Thank you. This point was actually discussed quite a lot in the chairs and vice chairs meeting when we were going through it. The reason it's been removed is because obviously we've got the planning guarantee, and particularly at the moment there's a consultation going around in terms of planning reform and speeding up decision notices. In terms of what we have to do is we have to consult for 21 days and we have to get a decision through within 8 weeks for minors. And so we are trying to work within government timescales. So it's been removed, so it's not an absolute right in the constitution, but we have said that if the town or parish council make contact and say, sorry, our meeting's a week later or 2 weeks later, is that all right? Then we can and we will agree extensions, but it's not an absolute right because we are under pressure for government timescales, and it will cost the council if we can't get extension of times from the applicant under the planning guarantee.
I appreciate that. That's fantastic. It would be lovely to have seen that wording in here.
It's interesting, actually, in reflection of this came up at one of my very small parishes last night, their annual parish meeting. In terms of response to planning application, there's a number of parcels of land which have been sold by the Crown to different new landowners, and it's resulted in a number of planning applications. They've actually then amended their working practices by moving from bi-monthly to monthly to reflect that. So they're constantly on top of responses to various different planning applications going in. Sue, do you want to come back?
Yeah, just come back. I'm really happy if something like that could go in there to say we will try to accommodate. I mean, I'd like to, actually, I feel quite strongly, but I'd like to make a recommendation only that our towns and parishes and cities, working with them is absolutely key at the moment. And I think if we can just say we will, you know, these are the rules, we will try and accommodate where we can.
Sorry, you know, something of the words of a town or city or parish council can apply for an extension, although this isn't a right. I think those sort of words, so that the parish know that they can apply, because a lot of the time, so they will read this and think they cannot apply. It's going against them. If it's positively put that they can apply, but it might not necessarily be granted, I think that's a far better way of putting it. I don't know if you would agree with that.
We've had an awful long time on this, and quite rightly so. And we knew, obviously, quite understandably, this is going to be the item which would take the most time, because it's the biggest thing. Planning is where we have the most engagement with members of the public, and certainly a lot of my casework, particularly my rural parishes, is drawn up in terms of planning issues. With two more speakers, Sue Osborne and Stephen Pugsley, then I'm proposing Ros, we're going to call back as well. Ros, do you want to come back now to respond to some of the points? But after that, we've got two more speakers, and I'm going to try and draw this one to a close. So we do have another 2 or 3 items on the agenda, and Dave wants to come back as well. Yeah. But after that, I'm going to try and bring this item to a close. Ros.
I was just going to suggest that we could change the wording to indicate that we would accommodate deferrals from parish councils and meetings where possible, and leave it at something as simple as that. We don't need to make it really complicated, because that's the spirit of what we're trying to do, is accommodate wherever possible.
It's really helpful, Ros.
Could I propose that then?
I'm getting some good, helpful, pleasant nods around the room on that one. I think Mandy's going to suggest that, and I'm sure that will find support amongst the committee members. So I'll bring that from when we're going to add that to the recommendations at the end. Yeah, is that okay? Yeah. Sue Osborne.
Yeah, just for the avoidance of doubt, I'm quite happy to second Councillor Chilcott on that, to make sure that that is concreted in that. There are a couple of other questions I had, which may or may not have been covered, and I haven't necessarily wrote the numbers specific down. But when it comes to the referral process itself, and the chairs and vice chairs give us, in effect, we've got 2 days to respond. They have 3 days. They are allowed to use controversial or in the public interest. They are allowed to use that as to why they want to put something to committee and possibly support us. But it doesn't seem as though we're allowed to. Why is that? Also, as well, again, you haven't changed, and it should be done in the names of fairness, because we've done that with speaking times. Why are the parish councils not being given 28 days in line with councillors to respond? You've left it at 21 days. So why is that? And another question is also, why is the Strategic Planning Committee not going to be assessing or overseeing the local plan work? I would have thought that would be a big part for the Strategic Planning Committee, because it has oversight of the entire county, and yet it doesn't seem as though it's going to be involved, apart from the call of sites, into overseeing the local plan work. And I would have thought that your Strategic Planning Committee would in effect then be acting as a scrutiny committee to oversee those processes, consultations, and that they are legally sound and fair.
Thank you. Okay, if Alison covers the local plan issue first, and then I'll pick up on the other points.
So the policy matters go to the Planning and Transport Policy Exec Subcommittee, and that's because we need to separate out the regulatory function of the area and strategic planning committees from the policy function, which is the function of the executive.
Thank you. And the difference between the 21 and 28 days. Yeah, again, it was something that was subject to debate at the chair and vice chair's working group. Effectively, the legislation requires us to consult for 21 days. So if we were being fair and equitable, we could reduce councillor consultation to 21, but councillors were keen to see the responses from the parish and town councils before they responded to the planning applications, which is why there's a difference of a further week. In terms of the timeframes for the scheme of delegation, by the time it gets to referral, that's near the end of the planning process. Bearing in mind, it will take us about a week to validate it if we're lucky, 3 weeks for the consultation. We're already 4 or 5 weeks in to the 8-week process. So by the time we've drafted, addressed issues, revised plans, we're probably quite close to the end of the statutory time period. So we're quite close to needing to issue decisions. By introducing the referral process, it was a new process to some of the areas. So it's an extra elongation before you can get to the decision point on planning applications. It was decided that chairs, the area members would have 2 working days, not including the day the consultation goes out. So when they get the consultation on the referral, they've got that day plus a further 2 days. And then the chair and vice chair have 3 days after that. So within a week, we should be able to issue the decision. But that's an extra week on the end of the process where we're trying to sort of pull decisions within the statutory time periods.
Can I come back on that? Because also what's not listed is also as well, why are we not allowed to sort of use public interest or controversy in terms of our reasons for putting something to committee, whereas our chairs are. And also there's no requirement in any of this for the chairs or vice chairs to actually even speak to us, which sometimes can be very remiss. It puts an enormous amount of power in the hands of chairs or vice chairs, and it almost feels as though rank and file councillors are actually almost being downgraded in their role. It seems as though the parish councils perhaps have more power to get things to committee than the rank and file member.
I think, yeah, in terms of sort of call-in reasons, the reason they have to be planning based is, as a planning committee, we have to consider the planning merits. Just because there's a lot of people that like it or a lot of people that don't like it isn't enough to call in the planning application. So normally, if there is an application that is quite controversial, the parish or town council have a long list of reasons as to what the issues with the application are. As a local member, you can just say you would like it to go to committee to fully explore the highway matters, for example. That doesn't say support or object, that just says there's a material reason, this is a material reason, it needs more investigation. The fact it's controversial isn't a material reason, so we would need to know what's material to debate it in the planning committee.
But I say the chairs have the luxury of using that. We don't. The other one is, how are you going to ensure consistency and quality across the 4 committees? Because I've experienced of this in South Somerset, where for some of the committees we had to produce very detailed reasons why we wanted to go to committee, but yet in another area the member was just able to say, I want this to go to committee, and it happened. It shouldn't have happened, but it did. So how are you going to ensure consistency against committees? Because there's nothing worse than finding that some committees take a more liberal line than others, and you lose out as a result. That's one question. The other one is as well, in Somerset, as far as I'm aware, rurality is treated as a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act. And yet by maybe putting in such tight timescales, we could potentially be discriminating against our smaller parishes. How are you going to guard against that in terms of equality? And someone could possibly raise that.
I'll come back on that. In terms of making sure that there's consistency of approach, we have a form for referral, and that form requires people to set out what the material planning considerations are when calling it, when the chairs and vice chairs refer it to committee. So we will be applying that. In terms of the equality legislation, unfortunately, the regulations mean that parish and town councils have 21 days to respond. That's set down in the regulations. Dawn's already explained the current regime that we have in terms of having to meet the 8-week deadline. The government are currently consulting on an accelerated planning system. If that goes ahead, there will be no availability of extensions of time for householder applications. And that will mean that if we don't determine those within that period, not only will it affect our performance statistics and run the risk of designation, we will end up having to pay back under the proposal's planning fees.
Very quickly, Sue.
Sorry,
Yeah.
it's a very quick one, Ross, but in our old scheme of delegation, I think Tony will back me up on that because we did an enormous amount of work on a programme called Planning Reimagined. And amazingly enough, Tony and I agreed on quite a few things. But one of the things we brought forward was to take out of referral to committee householder applications, that those would be dealt with by officer delegation only. So they wouldn't come to committee. So it would take quite a lot of work away. The only exceptions were, I think, if there was issues around conservation and listed building, or if an area chair specifically wanted to request one. But on the whole, we took households straight out.
We'd be very happy for that to happen.
Stephen Pugsley.
But just picking up that last point, if we may, there are some of us who are a bit more concerned about the householder applications elsewhere in the county. So perhaps, again, this is part of the ongoing review that we just need to keep everything tightly reviewed during the course of the next 12 months. And it may well be that we make a change in the way that Councillor Osborne has suggested. But I think I'd be a bit reluctant into leaping into anything too quickly now. Let's make that part of the ongoing review. The 2 points I wanted to make, and Officer Blom-Cooper was, I think, perfectly content with this change, is that we do need to make it clear that where we are talking about local council law in this document, we actually mean Somerset council law. Yes. So can we please make sure that that is consistently changed, and it's not just 8.4, but it's also 8.8 and probably elsewhere in the document as well. So someone will need to go through and just make sure that those changes are made. Point one. The more major point really comes back to this issue, if I may, about minerals. My understanding really was always that minerals was a county responsibility, and it wasn't something that districts did individually. Indeed, so really, what we did with the first iteration of the Constitution was to give minerals to the Strategic Planning Committee, which had an overview of the entire county. And that seemed to me to be very sensible. And I can't, in all honesty, see why we would want to change that at this stage. No. The development control committees are working very well in their areas, and that's what they deal with, development control. I don't think they deal with minerals. I think, therefore, we should leave that bit as it is. I haven't yet heard any compelling arguments to change that, but I do think it is important that if there is something that is relevant to a particular area, and it needn't just be the Mendips, it could be West Somerset, it could be any part of the county where the extractive industries are working, then the Strategic Planning Committee should be hearing those concerns in that area. So I do support that, and again, I welcome the officers' assurance that will happen.
To come in, Ros is wanting to come in and perhaps respond to some of the points you've had.
Three things. One is historically, the district councils had no say whatsoever in a planning application. They all went to county as an automatic. And this was inevitably a real source of considerable disquiet and perhaps even stronger feeling than that on the issue. When the constitution with the new council was initially considered, we tried to find a halfway house by saying that applications could be considered initially at the local level, and then if it was a variation from the officer recommendation, or that there was some further more significant things to be considered, it could be then referred on to the strategic. But we've not had any examples of that happening during the period when that was in place. The officers have argued, as has the chair of the strategic committee, that both minerals and waste need considerable additional training, and therefore they felt, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing, but that it would on balance be right, but it should be held at a strategic county level rather than at a district. Therefore, the argument is now that it will stay at the strategic county level, because it is actually strategic industry for the whole country, not just for one area. But to recognise the significant impact quarrying has on the local community, wherever possible, the committee will be held locally to enable people to attend and express their views on the subject. And I think that's the compromise position we've got to. But please, Helen or someone correct me if I've got that wrong.
Ros, you've encapsulated what's in the report there, I think.
Yes, just to remind members, in terms of the current arrangements in the Constitution, waste and mineral applications will go to the area boards, but if the area boards go against the officer recommendation, then there's a referral up to the strategic committee, who will then be the decision-making body. And also if the officer is recommending approval and that's a departure from the local plan on a waste and minerals application, that too would go to the strategic committee, not the area committee. So even under the current arrangements, not all waste and mineral applications would go to strategic.
Dave Mansell, then I'm going to move to the recommendation after that one, because we've got about 3 other items after this one.
Thank you. My comments are to do with the referral process to committee, and especially the involvement of divisional members. Firstly, page 417, 5.6, and it's actually something that's missing for the divisional members, in that if the divisional member has a contrary view and wishes for the application to go to committee, that's not taken into account. That it does now, but it's being dropped. But for parish councils, it's staying in. So I don't understand why that. I would say just keep it the same as it is now. Keep the same process in, that it's an automatic referral for both parish councils and for members as well. I see no reason why that should be taken out. So that's one. The other one, it crops up several places. The place I've got it is page 394, 8.6b. And this is the timing allowed when the officer report is published, makes a recommendation, and then find out whether it's a contrary view, and we find out then why the officers made the recommendation that they have. Now the local member has only got 2 days in which to come back to the chair. This is asking for trouble, and it already causes trouble now. And I think all members need to be aware this could cause trouble for you. It could cause trouble for all of us. 2 days is just unreasonable. It means you've got to notice it's come in your inbox. You've got to digest it, see what it's there. You could be attending meetings throughout the day and in the evening, not being able to keep fully up to speed with your email. And you've got to spot this absolutely crucial one, that if you don't respond to it and deal with it, your wishes are not going to be taken into account. And even more than that, the wishes of the people you represent are not going to be taken into account. And we've set up this process with this minimal timing in it. It's a bureaucratic process that I have to say the signs are at the moment everybody struggles with, officers and the members. As I say, it's just asking for problems. And the trouble is, it fails unsafe. So if it fails, and it does fail, it fails and causes the problem nobody wants, I hope, to happen. And for the application not to be dealt with in the way that it should have been, and not for the divisional member to have the chance to refer to consult with the chair. I really think this needs to change. As an improvement would be a longer period. Perhaps it could be done that 4 days is allowed for the divisional member to have consultation with the chair, and the chair still has 5 days. That keeps it within the current one. It still feels unsafe, but at least it's better than this absolute minimal 2 days that is proposed at the moment. I have to say my preference would be that it's actually an automatic referral, and so it then fails safe. So it automatically goes to committee if the divisional member has made it clear they've got the contrary view, given their material reasons, and they've asked for it to go to committee. They've done everything that they should do and have made it really clear what they think. You know, they've said they think it should go to committee. They've not been ambiguous. They've stated it. And that should be the default view. That's where it should default to. So it should be an automatic position that it goes to the committee. Now, if the officers or the chair wish to contact the local member and say, do you wish to withdraw and have a discussion? Fine. Put the onus the other way round. And then it at least fails safe. It doesn't fail unsafe, which is what we're doing at the moment. And it's simpler and less bureaucratic than we've got at the moment. I really, really think this has got to be changed. And if we don't change it today, I can guarantee this is going to come up at full council. Thank you.
I'll pick that up. What we've tried to do through the work with the chairs and vice chairs and the working party is to simplify the current process, which was causing problems. The current process doesn't have any time limit on it, and that was causing us problems as well, because some chairs and vice chairs were dealing with it very quickly and some weren't, and that clearly wasn't working. So what we sought to do is clarify that by providing a clear timescale. I'm sure within the 5 working days we could accommodate a slight difference, but I think the chairs and vice chairs might have something to say about only having a day to turn around to go look at, for the same reasons that you've already described. But we really can't afford to extend the time limit because of the constraints that we have as a planning authority to determine within specified times. And as I've mentioned before, we are under increasing pressure, particularly if the proposals that the government are consulting on now go through in terms of an accelerated planning system. For example, on commercial applications, they're suggesting they will all have to be determined within 10 weeks. Otherwise, fee payback or deemed approval. So it's becoming increasingly difficult for us to provide the time and the engagement that ideally we'd all like.
Sorry, just in terms of clarity, when the planning application originally comes in, as a local member, you have 28 days to comment. So within that 28 days, you can say you want it to go to planning committee, and you can set out 28 days for the divisional members, for the Somerset members. The end point, which is basically this 2-3 day thing that we're debating, is after the 28 days. So you've had already, nearly a month to comment. Yeah. And then at the end of the process, the officer has drafted up the report. The officer sets out all the comments within the report. The officer sets out how they've been addressed or how they've been mitigated if there's any impacts. And it's that report that goes out to the elected member for the area saying, this is the report, this is the comment, this is why we're recommending it the way we're recommending it. If they don't get back, the original comment isn't ignored. The original comment is taken into consideration through the ACR meeting with the chairs and vice chairs. If you do get back within the 2 days and go, I don't care what the report says, I still want it at committee, then most of the chairs and vice chairs are pushing them through to committee. So it's not that your original comment, it's not that the original comment doesn't get considered, because it does get considered as part of the process, but we have to have a time frame on the end. So if we're looking at extending the time frame for a decision by a week, it could split that it's 3 days for the local members and 2 days for the chairs and vice chairs. At the moment, in my area, we run a weekly session with the chairs and vice chairs, and we look at things and say, if they haven't got back by Friday, which is the end of the day, you know, we're ready to delegate. Are you happy for us to delegate, as long as we don't hear back? So we often sign stuff off with the chair and vice chair beforehand, subject to the members not coming back.
But I'm going to ask you to come back. I've just been told by Claire we have to be out of this room by 5:30, so we're going to have to bring this. There's another meeting apparently taking place in here shortly afterwards. David, do you want to come back?
Yes, so what happens is it does only get to refer to committee if that consultation takes place. I think, yes, we will understand you asked for it earlier, but then we've got this really narrow window, and it does happen at the moment. If you don't get back to the chair quickly enough, then it does then not go to committee. So that is the chance. I think we also need to make clear, I made 2 suggestions. Neither of those suggestions asked for more time period, but the responses have all come back as though I did. I made 2 suggestions to not move to the end of the time period. So perhaps better mention them again. One was that it's a 4-day window for the divisional member, and the chair still got the full 5 days. They still know when the report is there, so they've got time to think about it. But we've just got 4 days in which for the divisional member to come back. My preference would be that it went the other way round, and that it just automatically went to committee. But the officers have got the chance to contact the local member, or the chair has, and have a conversation with them, ask them whether they withdraw, and then that at least fails safe. So that would be my preference. I think one other point, I think we also need to remember that it's only when that case officer report comes out that we find out what the officers are thinking, and we see what they're saying. So we can only respond to that once we've seen it. We couldn't do it in the first 28 days. Officers don't say what they're thinking at the beginning. They say it right at the end. So that's our chance. We have to respond to what the officer has said. And we do look at it, and we should consider it. And we might say, okay, yeah, it's done. But we may not, and we may still want this to go to committee and have good reasons for doing so. And I really think we need a decent, proper window to do. My preference would be, though, for a system that fails safe and doesn't fail unsafe as proposed.
You want to come back very quickly, please?
Just very quickly, you know, why can't divisional members, because I do find the current system difficult and almost, you know, asked about tip, for want of a northern expression, in that it's backwards. Because at that point, when you've just got the information, when it's just been validated, you don't know what further evidence is going to come forward, what's going to come out the woodwork. Why can't members not have the right to request that something goes to committee at any point in the proceedings? Because sometimes you may get a statutory consultee object on various grounds, which contradicts another policy. We don't know that. We should have that right as members to be able to do that. We still have to provide planning reasons, absolutely. And then it is up to the area chairs to then agree whether that goes. Because at the moment as well, where we could fall into problems is with parish council ones, where parish councils want something to go, and then the decision comes back to us to, do we agree with our parish council it should go to committee? And the risk of missing those, as you say, that will get us into trouble.
Just in terms of responses, you can comment outside of the statutory period. The risk is we might make a decision. So the reason we put the 21 days and the 28 days is because we hold off making a decision until that time's passed. If we're ready to make a decision, then the risk is we make a decision before your comments arrived, if you're submitting it late.
It has to be the last
Can
one.
I just come back on that? I had an example where an application was going through, looked okay, and this was, I think, under the old scheme, coming into the new scheme, and there was a major problem with a conservation officer throwing objections in to an application which the applicant was under the impression was going to pass. I then put in that I would like this to go to committee because I think the economic versus the heritage is actually quite an important part in a rural area. And I was in effect told, tough luck, too late, you can't.
Going to say that on this, and we've had a very thorough, full debate on this, and I think we are not going to be able to make a resolution in terms of in terms of encompassing and agreeing a lot of the different points which have been made in terms of the report. But that doesn't mean they're not important because they are very important. And I think they'll all be encompassed along with all the evidence of the survey, the workshop and this report from this committee as well, for the portfolio holders to look at and before the agenda item is brought forward for annual council on May the 22nd. And then obviously that is the decision-making body which will make the decision, and we will have another opportunity for a very thorough debate again at full council, and I'm sure that we will. But I wanted to bring forward an addendum to the agenda recommendations, going back sometime with that Mandy had said, which we all agreed we were going to bring forward. Can you just repeat that? And I know Stephen said he was going to second it.
I think it's picking up Ros's words, actually.
Yes. Ros, you still there?
I am still with you. I suggested that I generally can't remember the words. I'm sure the recording has it, but basically, wherever possible, we will wish to accommodate parish councils' deferment of.
Yeah, thank you, Alison.
Of the decision.
What I wrote down was 8.8F would be amended so that parish, town, city councils can apply for an extension of time, and where possible, this will be accommodated.
Thank you. You're happy, and seconded by Stephen. All those in favour of that? So can we add that to the main recommendations? Notwithstanding, we're going to have another thorough debate, quite rightly, about full council, and then the comments will be drawn together and put in this report, which will be encompassed in the report going to full council and reflected upon by the portfolio holder before the report is drawn up for the full council. Can we move to the recommendations? Do we have a proposer? A seconder? That's Stephen and Emily. All those in favour? Any against? Okay. Any abstentions? Thank you. Item number 11 is the annual report of constitution and governance, and that's pages 479 to 482. Scott.
And just for members' information, this report tries to summarise the work of the committee over the past 12 months. And again, it's intended that this is reported to the annual general meeting, subject to any comments that the committee may have.
And any members wish to comment on this report? We agreed to note this report. You agree to note? Okay. Recommendation is that we ask to note the report and recommend to full council. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Wilkins, seconded by Councillor Osborne. All those in favour? That is carried. Is the Somerset Council's initial response to Local Boundary Commission for England on proposed boundary review. And we've got Stephen Lake, who's been waiting to make the elections manager present a slide pack on the update. Just want to point out to members, this is not the opportunity for us to say whichever place, village is in the wrong division or divisional names. I think this is just to report back on the work the council officers are doing in terms of the commissioners, in terms of our council's submission in terms of the size of the council. That's right, isn't it? And those other opportunities for divisional names and boundaries will take place in the fullness of time.
Thank you, Chairman. There is a PowerPoint presentation. I think we're trying to sort it out. But briefly, Chairman, because we all want to go home. I've set out in the PowerPoint the timetable, because I think it's important that we recognise that this is going to come up on us very quickly. You can go to the next one. Yeah. So by July, we've got to put a submission into the Boundary Commission as the number of councillors which the council deems can deliver most effectively. After that, it's a very short time period when, from the 27th of August to the 4th of November, we're going to have received their proposals for new divisional arrangements. And we need to get an answer in quickly at that point. Then they'll have their draft proposals between March and May, final proposals August next year, and we'll have elections on the 6th of May 2027. But I think we're going to have to be able to respond quickly to anything that they put together. Go to the next one, Claire, please. So where are we now? We have a spreadsheet with the electorates for the polling districts for the last 5 years. There are, I think, 518 polling districts. It's been quite a struggle to pull all of those figures together. If anybody wants to see this spreadsheet, I'm happy to show you because it's on my laptop. And the Commission has a formula which works out what they project the electorate will be for 2029, because that's the key figure that their proposals will be based on. Planning colleagues, some of them are here, will then be able to challenge those projected electorates based on their specific knowledge of each of those polling districts in terms of potential development, where there are local plan proposals and also existing planning permissions. So that will be put together. And we've been creating a map which shows the polling districts at the bottom, planning consents, etc., etc. So you'll be able to look all the way through this map and see how everything fits together, and that's electronic, so that hopefully we can come up with a good sound answer to the questions that we're being proposed. As you can see, the number of records that we've been dealing with is astronomical, really. Somerset's a big place when you actually try and get all of these records, number of individual houses, etc. And so we hope to have a quick run at getting those possible electorates estimated as so that we can provide it to the Commission so that they can produce their initial figures and proposals from the number of electors that this council, members that this council deems to be the most effective. So the spreadsheet has been completed as far as the electorate figures are concerned. We need to get back those figures to the Electoral Boundary, the Local Government Boundary Commission as quickly as possible. And then we've got to come up with the optimum number of councillors necessary. Chairman, I've run through that very quickly because I know.
Thank you very much. And members, who would like to go first? Van de Chilcott.
All the way through you said we. Who's the we? Because your we isn't councillor we, from what I can understand. So when will the debate, the conversation, the more of the detail be out and about? Because the devil is in the detail with these reviews. And at the moment, you know, that, having been through this previously, that doesn't sort of tell me anything at all, really. And it's only probably 12 weeks off before we've got to get it in. And it feels like there's a lot of work to do. And what I don't want is for councillors to be shown something at the 11th hour that you then haven't got time to ruminate and contemplate. So are you saying that as councillors, we have no part or say in those submissions by July? Because I couldn't see any reference to that in your slides.
Stephen, could you tell us what the process is in terms of who's making the suggestion, the number of officers, when has that decision been made, and what member input, or is there any member input in terms of members' opportunity to influence the decision regarding the submission of this council in terms of the number of councillors?
Chairman, we is everybody here. Chairman, we is everybody here. It's members and officers together. What we're working on now as officers is the statistical information. That's what has to be submitted to the commission. The number of members is a decision for members.
Forward, and what forum will make that decision? When will that debate take place?
Scott.
Again, if it's helpful, I think what Stephen's referring to in part is the fact that that work will culminate in proposals, one involving briefings with members, but two will come through to this committee, and you'll know on its next item we've got to look at what matters are coming to your meetings in July, September and December. Clearly the bit of work will be about how the responses at various stages to the LGBCE come here for this committee to consider, and then where necessary, like the council size response, that this committee then recommends a response up to full council. So July's full council will need to agree the council's response on the benefit of this committee's advice and recommendations.
So this will be coming to the first meeting of the first cycle after the annual council
of this committee.
And what date is that?
The 4th of July.
4th of July, okay. Right, so there is a clear audit trailer then of how members can influence the decision, and it will be discussed by members, and this committee on the 4th of July will be making a recommendation to go to full council based upon what officers are telling us in our members' discussion. Mandy?
I really think we could or should have had a timeline, some kind of idea of the process, because this is, when we did it in West Somerset, and I'm going back a while, there was a much longer run-in and a lot of debate, and I think we got to the right place. I'm just not getting a sense of that here.
I endorse what Mandy says. I'm rather concerned that there doesn't seem to be any explicit point where members come into this, and I'm still concerned that come the 4th of July, we'll be looking at, in effect, a done deal. I remember South Somerset's review, and I would say the same with you. It felt like there was a longer timeline, and I do think there was more member involvement. But the problem with the boundary commission is they will do something completely left side that nobody asked for, nobody wanted, nobody saw coming, which was the merger of 3 rural wards into one giant super ward, but with 3 members. And nobody wanted that, nobody saw it coming. So despite everything, it seems the boundary commission still make up their own mind.
Yeah, just a number of points, Chair, if I can, please. So just to make it clear, this first submission is purely on the number of councillors. It's not about boundaries. It's not about wards. It's not about number of members per division. It's purely on the number of councillors. We have with us today Ali Lang from our comms team, and Ali and I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago just to discuss how we can increase the member engagement into this, just being conscious of the fact that because of the timeline and other priorities that we've had, we haven't had that level of member engagement apart from a couple of briefings at this committee. So I know Ali's got some ideas about how we can increase that kind of engagement for members moving forward. And the final point, although there is a council submission, it just doesn't have to be a council submission. So anyone can make recommendations forward, whether that's based on individual members, division, group party, whatever option you come forward with. There can be multiple submissions be made to the boundary commission. It just doesn't have to be a one and all. What we need to do as officers is to ensure that if that's an approach you wish to take as individuals or members or groups, then we provide the data and the relevant information to allow you to do that and to supplement that submission that you may choose to make. Okay.
Sorry, I understand you're saying you're just submitting a number, but that number will come from a decision-making process based on a whole load of factors, which will need consideration. So it's, I mean, I don't know what you feel the factors are that will determine that number, but the boundary numbers will be a big part of that, and it will need some significant sort of looking at to see where those numbers are coming out at.
That first stage, if I may, is just based purely on the number of electorate. It's based on the operation of the authority. you know, what the authority feels is the appropriate number of members to make that representation, to make decisions, to furnish their committees, to take the whole governance of the organisation forward. So those are the factors that come into play. There is a geographical element just because of the rurality of the area and that urban and rural mix. But fundamentally, the number of members is based on the proportion per the population of the electorate within the area, looked at through the lens of what this council needs in order to operate, in order to run and take decisions.
Let's come back.
As I said, I think they want to take into account the governance of the council. You know, is this an opportunity to look at how the council operates, how the council wants to operate, and their priorities moving forward? What is the body of membership that this council feels and can justify that they need to be a proactive and appropriate representative of their constituents? How to be an effective councillor is a phrase they often use. What was part of the presentation that the Local Boundary Commission gave to the council late last year was a busy councillor is not necessarily an effective councillor. How many councillors does this organisation need in order to be an effective organisation? So that's the assessment that they want to take.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not sure whether this is relevant now. It may be, or it may be further along. I think some of us would, and it has been talked about before, would prefer there to think that single member wards will make more sense. So hope that is part of the thinking, and that may have an influence on the number of councillors. I'm not too sure, but anyway, certainly somewhere along it should be. And something else along the line, which I hope will be considered, is just what they're called. And I just called them wards. And I'm not the first one to say that. I know others have as well. Divisions is an odd name. So I do hope someone puts that in as well. Thank you.
Sue, very quick.
Sorry, very quickly, I mean, one of the things that's been stated through transformation, financial emergency, etc., is the council will become smaller, so we will be doing less things. Is the Boundary Commission likely to take that into account at this stage when it's coming up with the numbers?
I think that's part of the submission that can be made. You know, if this council, for example, was very financially well off and had aspirations of lots of work to do and to do lots of engagement, lots of outreach, lots of development, then that could be a justification for more members, because you're making more decisions at significant financial value that you need to furnish the council with that decision-making ability too. So the converse would also be correct. If this council is retreating from some of that discretionary work and just don't want to use the statutory discretionary label, but you know, retreating to more of their business as usual work rather than more of that proactive work, then yes, that could be a consideration in respect to the number of councillors that number that's submitted.
Anybody else?
Very quickly and very selfishly, Mr. Chairman. Somerset isn't just in parts a rural county, it is a sparsely populated county. And we do have to be particularly attentive to the numbers, because what we don't want to do is to end up with a situation where some parts of the county have potentially a single member covering a vast area because of having to have an equality of numbers which is too high. So that does need to be part of the consideration now before the submission is made. So I do hope that we will have the opportunity to discuss that further, because we just need to
really important point. And yeah, I mean, I'll give an example. I think my division is only the 10th biggest geographically, but it would still take me, even on a day where there is little traffic, 45 minutes to drive from one side to the other. I know there are 9 divisions even bigger, so that just puts it, you know, your division is probably the biggest. Yeah. First Constitution and Governance Committee after annual council on the 4th of July. Can we note this report? But obviously this is an ongoing feast, this debate, undoubtedly of interest to everybody. And move forward to the final item on the agenda is the work programme 13. And What would you like to introduce this one?
Can do, Chair. I suppose if anything, it's just a quick, it's an undertaking in the sense that quite a number of comments been made today about areas that the committee would like to bring forward and look at further during the rest of 24-25. So we'll take those away as actions.
We've had two or three items today which members are very, very keen to look at again, aren't they?
So we'll update the work programme to include those.
Yeah. Okay. Any other items which haven't been identified? If not, can I formally close the meeting? And thank you, Richard, but very quickly. Microphone.
Just make sure that we got on the forward plan, the rights of way.
Yeah, we've got it. We've identified about 2 or 3 different items.
Is that going to be on, what date is that going to be on?
4th of July. Well, no, that will be on the work. That will be on the forward work programme. Yes. Emily.
Yeah. So just to clarify, we've got delegated decisions, rights of way, and planning. Those are the 3 things that are going to be going forward.
Yes. And also petitions. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's why I put my hand up ages ago, but you didn't see me.
Oh, sorry.
That's why I followed Hub House out, actually. It's not only rights of way, it's bridleways. Yeah. And you know all about it, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Because that they're all
encompassing and stuff. Yeah.
So it's just not bridleways.
No. Andy.
I thought we were going to have a conversation at some point about other areas of the constitution we felt needed looking at some point.
Scott's nodding well, that one, yes.
If they want it, email me.
And if anybody wishes after this, because it's been a very long meeting, if anybody wishes to anything to go on the work programme, email Claire Brendan as soon as possible, and we'll put that on the work for a work programme. Okay. Thank you, members. Thank you very much.